The dressmaker holds up a bolt of crimson silk, and for 1 second, just one, your hand moves toward it. The colour is extraordinary, deep and warm, the colour of garnets, of port wine held up to a gas lamp, of something alive. Your fingers almost reach it. Then she moves it away, gently, smoothly, the way you'd redirect a child from something dangerous. That's not really suitable, she says, and she smiles at you the way people smile at you now, kindly, carefully, the smile that says, you know what I mean, and you know why I'm right, and we don't need to say the words aloud. You are 43 years old, you are not dead, but according to every rule this society has ever written down, signed, distributed, and enforced through 1,000 small humiliations like this one, you're supposed to start looking like it. Welcome to Henry's History for Sleep. I'm Henry. Tonight we're going somewhere that doesn't involve battlefields or plagues or famines, at least not the kind you can see from the outside. Tonight we're going somewhere more intimate than that. We're going into a Victorian dressing room, into a Victorian mirror, into the particular and exquisitely documented hell of being a woman in the second half of the 19th century who's committed the unforgivable crime of getting older. So, picture a city. Picture London in the 1880s. 5 million people breathing coal smoke, living within a mile of each other, judging each other with a precision and enthusiasm that would make a medieval inquisitor feel underpowered. A city where a woman's entire social existence could be elevated or destroyed by the width of a ribbon or the angle of a hat feather. Where women spent more time managing their appearance than most men spent managing their businesses. Where the rules for dress were not suggestions but laws, unwritten laws, but enforced with a ruthlessness that written laws rarely managed. Now add one more rule on top of all of that. Add the rule that says, at a certain age, you stop being a woman in the full sense the society recognizes. At a certain age, you begin to fade. You dress yourself in the colours of fading. You put your hair up and keep it there. You step back from the social stage and take a seat in the wings, where you will remain quietly and gracefully and without complaint for the rest of your life. That age, in case you were wondering, is approximately 40. Give or take a few years, depending on how charitable your social circle is feeling. Now, get comfortable. Turn the light down low. Here we go. Your name is Margaret Evelyn Hartley, née Pemberton. You're 43 years old. You live at number 14 Chiltern Street, Marylebone, London, in a narrow Georgian townhouse with good bones and slightly peeling wallpaper, in the upper rooms that your husband has been meaning to fix for 3 years. Your husband is called George. He is 47, a solicitor, moderately prosperous, moderately kind, moderately attentive. You have 2 children. Your daughter Clara is 22 and recently married. Your son Edmund is 19 and studying law at Lincoln's Inn, following his father's footsteps with the enthusiasm of a man who has not yet discovered he has no enthusiasm for it. You have a cook, a parlour maid, and a girl who comes 3 times a week to help with the washing. By the standards of the 1880s, you're doing very well. And you're standing in the dressmaker's on Cavendish Square with your hand half extended toward a bolt of crimson silk that you have just been told, gently, firmly, and with a smile, is not suitable for you. Not suitable. The words hang in the air of the shop like the smell of camphor and fresh cotton. Not suitable. Not for a woman your age. Not for a woman who has passed the invisible line. No ceremony, no announcement, no moment anyone warned you about that separates the women who dress in colours from the women who dress in tones. You pull your hand back, You look at the dressmaker, Miss Poole, 32 years old, trim and precise. With her measuring tape draped over her shoulders like a badge of authority, she's earned 1 inch at a time. She's not being cruel. That's the worst part. She's being correct. She's telling you the truth as this world understands truth, and she is doing it with perfect kindness. Something in a dove grey, she suggests, or perhaps a soft mauve. We've just had in the most beautiful wool from lions. The drape on it is extraordinary. Dove grey, soft mauve, the colours of half mourning, of lavender sachets, of things put away in chests, the colours of women becoming invisible. Let me see the mauve, you say. And this is where we begin. The rules about how older Victorian women were supposed to dress did not appear suddenly, from nowhere, fully formed. They grew slowly, the way all the cruelest social systems grow, through accumulation, through assumption, through the 1,000 tiny reinforcements of fashion plates and etiquette manuals, and the raised eyebrows of other women who'd already accepted the same restrictions, and could not bear to see anyone else resist them. To understand the rules, you have to understand the world that made them. And to understand that world, you need to stand in this dressing room, in this particular morning in October 1883, and feel what Margaret feels. The room smells of fresh wool and the faint sweet chemical burn of dye, and underneath both of those something older. The smell of the rooms behind the rooms, the workroom where the seamstresses sit, the smell of closely packed women working by insufficient light, wool dust and tea, and the particular sourness of enclosed spaces. Miss Poole's shop is bright and tasteful at the front. The carpet is a clean pearl grey. The bolts of fabric on the long shelves glow softly in the October light coming through the big windows. You can hear the street outside, the clop of horses, a boy selling something at a yell too distant to make out, the rumble of a carriage on cobblestones. Miss Poole brings the mauve. It is beautiful. You will admit that. A deep, rich purple grey, almost violet in some lights, the colour of clouds just before a storm when the light comes from the wrong direction. She drapes a length of it across her forearm and holds it near your face, and you watch yourself in the mirror set at the end of the counter, the long mirror in the brass frame, the one that shows you from head to mid-torso, and you look at what the colour does to your face. It does something, you'll admit. It makes your skin look warmer. It brings out the grey in your hair, which you have not yet allowed to go fully grey, still holding the dark brown with a few defiant threads of silver at the temples, in a way that is perhaps distinguished, perhaps even handsome, but it is not crimson, it is not garnet, it is not the warm living red of the silk she put away. Your morning began several hours before you arrived at Cavendish Square. It began as your mornings always begin, in the dark, October dark, the particular darkness of a London morning when the fog sits low over the streets and the light doesn't come until nearly 8, and even then it comes apologetically, grey and thin, barely enough to see by. You woke at 6:30. George was still sleeping. He sleeps heavily, always has, the deep uncomplicated sleep of a man who does not lie awake thinking about the particular angle of social anxiety you're currently navigating. His breathing is steady and slow. The room smells of him, a familiar smell, not unpleasant. Soap and wool and something warm and animal that you have slept next to for 21 years. You know every degree of variation in that smell. You know what it smells like when he's worried, when he's unwell, when he had wine at supper, You lay there for a moment, just a moment, and with your eyes open in the dark. This is a small private habit you have before you get up. Before you begin the work of being Margaret Hartley of Chiltern Street, solicitor's wife, mother of 2 grown children, mistress of a narrow Georgian house. Before all of that starts, there is one moment when you are simply yourself. No particular age, no particular role. Just a mind waking up in a body, blinking at the dark ceiling. Then the clock on the mantel ticked toward the half hour and you got up. The floor is cold under your bare feet. This is one of the small, unalterable facts of October mornings in London. The floor is cold. No matter what you do, rug beside the bed, fire laid the night before, the floor is cold at 6:30 in the morning. Your feet know this. They have known it for 20 years in this house. They find the rug anyway, purely from habit, but the rug doesn't help much because the rug is cold too. You wrapped yourself in your dressing gown, heavy wool, dark blue, getting slightly threadbare at the left elbow, and went to the washstand. The water in the jug had been sitting since Ellen filled it the night before. Cold. You poured it into the basin carefully, not wanting to splash too much and chill yourself further, and washed your face and hands with the bar of glycerin soap that you've used for 15 years and will probably continue to use for the rest of your life. The mirror above the washstand is small, oval. You looked at yourself in it while you washed. This is something you do every morning, not with vanity, not any more. Or perhaps not in the way you did at 25 when looking in the mirror was still partly about hope, partly about calculation, partly about something you can only call hunger. The hunger of someone who knows they are being looked at and wants to know what that looking sees. Now, when you look in the mirror, it is more practical than that, more businesslike. You are assessing the face you're going to take into the world today and determining what work needs to be done. Your face at 43 is not what it was at 25. This is a sentence so obvious that writing it down seems almost redundant, and yet every morning in that oval mirror it arrives fresh, still carrying some small residue of surprise. You were, at 25, striking rather than beautiful. Not the soft prettiness that Victorian taste preferred, but something sharper, more defined, a face with good angles and dark eyes, and a mouth that could be, in certain lights and certain moods, quite arresting. You knew this. You weren't vain about it, but you knew it in the way you know any practical fact about yourself, the way you know your height or your hat size. At 43, the angles are still there, the eyes are still dark, but the skin has changed, less taut, more textured, the lines around your eyes etched by 20 years of squinting in bad light, of laughing, of the small sustained effort of thinking. Your hair, which was once a warm dark brown, has threads of silver now that have been appearing since your mid-30s, increasing every year. Not unpleasant, the silver. In some lights it makes your hair look richer, more complex. But it is silver. And silver hair, in 1883, does not belong to women who wear crimson. You dried your face and began the process of dressing. We need to talk about this process because it is not simple, and it is not fast, and it is not comfortable. And if you have any idea that Victorian women simply put on a dress and went about their day, you need to spend a morning being Margaret and recalibrate. It begins with the stays. Your corset is made of coutil, a heavy diagonal weave that holds its shape under pressure, and whalebone. Proper whalebone, not the steel boning that's becoming fashionable, though you've heard arguments for it. The stays are a soft ivory, slightly yellowed with age and washing, laced up the back with a long cord that you can manage yourself only imperfectly, only pulling it part way, until Ellen comes up to do the final tightening. While you wait for Ellen, you sit on the edge of the bed in your chemise and your half-lace stays and your hair down, and for a few minutes you exist in a state of partial undress that nobody outside this bedroom will ever see, because nobody outside this bedroom is supposed to know that this state exists. In public, in social life, in the drawing rooms and streets and shops of London, you are finished, complete, composed. The internal scaffolding, the pins and laces and petticoats and padding, is supposed to be invisible. This is, in miniature, the entire situation you're living in. Your hair is down while you wait for Ellen. It falls to the middle of your back, thicker than you expected it to stay, considering everything. Still dark at the ends, silver near the scalp, a complicated gradient that, down and loose, is genuinely, objectively beautiful. You know this. You don't say it, even to yourself in quite those terms, because vanity is one of the small pleasures your age is no longer supposed to indulge. But you know it in the same quiet, practical way you know the structure of your own face. Your hair down in the morning is yours alone. That's the rule. That's always been the rule, but it has tightened with age. At 20, at 25, at 30, a woman might wear her hair down in a casual domestic context. A morning, a private evening, a moment of deliberate informality that communicated something, that signalled she was in a context of intimacy and ease. A woman might even, in the right circumstances, be seen with her hair down in a way that was considered charming, artless. The calculated artlessness of someone who knows the effect of what they're doing. At 43, a woman does not do this. At 43, your hair is down only in this room, only in these minutes, only before the world begins. The moment Ellen finishes the lacing and pins the last pin, that is the last it is seen until tomorrow morning. Ellen arrives at 7. She's 24, has been with you for 6 years, has seen you in every degree of incompleteness, and maintains a perfect professional neutrality about all of it, which you've always appreciated. She finishes the stays. You feel the familiar pressure, the compression across the ribs, the straightening of the spine that happens whether you want it to or not, the body conforming to the shape the stays insist upon. Not painful, not anymore. You're used to it. You've been laced into some version of this garment since you were 17, and the absence of it, on the rare occasions it occurs, illness, certain moments of private undress, feels almost alarming now, a looseness you don't quite know what to do with. Then the petticoats. 3 of them this morning. You're going out, so the full layering is required. The first, plain cotton, sits closest to the stays. The second, slightly heavier, with a small flounce at the hem. The third is your best one, stiffened at the bottom with a horsehair braid that gives the outer skirt its proper shape. Each one goes on over your head, is tied, adjusted. The weight of them is real. You feel it on your hips. A familiar heaviness, like wearing a small piece of furniture. The bustle. You're still wearing a moderate bustle in 1883. The fashion hovering between the high bustle of the 1870s and what will become the exaggerated squared-off bustle of the later 80s is a frame of steel hoops and cotton padding that ties at the back and gives the skirt its shape. You have gotten adept at navigating chairs with it. You have gotten adept at navigating doorways, carriages, the awkward geography of drawing rooms with too much furniture. You have navigated the bustle for years. It does not bother you any more. But there is a particular quality to the weight of it today. Perhaps because you woke with the thought of the dressmaker's appointment already occupying some back corner of your mind. That feels heavier than usual. Your dress for the morning errands is a dark grey wool, well made, well fitted, with a slight sheen to the fabric that prevents it from looking too dour. The neck is high. You have a small white collar of lawn that pins inside it, the only relief of pale colour. The buttons up the back go from the waist to the neck, 15 of them, and Ellen does them with the speed of long practice. The sleeves are fitted through the arm with a small fullness at the shoulder. The skirt falls smoothly over the petticoats shaped by them, given its bell-like silhouette. You stand in front of the proper mirror, the large one in its mahogany frame, the one that shows you full length, while Ellen pins the collar, and you look at yourself in the completed assembly of clothing and structure and arrangement, and you are, objectively, a very well-dressed woman. You just don't look like yourself. This is the thought that you do not say aloud, because it is not a thought you're supposed to have. It is not a thought the etiquette manuals have made provision for. What you're supposed to think looking at your well-assembled, correctly coloured, appropriately structured self in the mirror is satisfaction, propriety, the pleasure of being correct, of fitting your category, of presenting the world with the face the world expects. You are a solicitor's wife, middle-age, respectable station, and your dress communicates all of this accurately and completely. What you think instead, very quietly, in the part of your mind where you still speak honestly to yourself, is, I look like someone who has given up. Hair next. Your hair is, without question, the site of the most exacting set of rules in your entire physical existence. More than the dress, more than the jewellery, more than the cut of the bodice or the length of the train. Your hair, and what you do with it, and what you're no longer permitted to do with it, is the clearest signal the world uses to read your age and your status and your place in the hierarchy of visible women. The rules, if you were to write them out, would take a significant amount of space. But the core of them is this. A woman of your age does not wear her hair loose, does not arrange it in any way that suggests looseness, softness, girlishness, any quality that might be construed as a performance of youth you no longer possess. Your hair must be up, thoroughly, architecturally, undeniably up, pinned so thoroughly that no strand could escape even in a high wind. The structure must communicate effort and permanence, and above all, containment. Your hair contained is a hair that knows its place. A hair down is a hair that has ideas above its station. Ellen begins. She brushes out the length of it. 70 strokes, no less, because Margaret Hartley does not economise on the small things. And you feel the bristles through your scalp and the weight of the hair being pulled through. And for a moment, just a moment, it feels extraordinary. Simply good. The physical pleasure of someone else brushing your hair is one of the small, uncomplicated satisfactions left to you in a world that has declared most of your satisfactions inappropriate. You close your eyes for the length of the brushing. Then the building begins. First, the rat. This is a little roll of padding made of your own shed hair, save for exactly this purpose, that will be pinned to the back of your head as a foundation for the chignon. It sits against your skull like a small, soft fist, hidden completely under the hair that goes over it. Nobody sees it. The whole point is that nobody sees it. It is the secret infrastructure of the hairstyle, the hidden work that makes the finished product look effortless and substantial and correct. Then the coiling. The main mass of your hair is brought up, coiled around the rat, pinned in place with hairpins that Ellen works in with the precision of someone installing rivets. Each pin slides in, catches, holds. They don't hurt. You've had this done so many times that your scalp has grown accustomed to the sensation, the faint pressure of dozens of small metal points. But you are aware of them. You are always aware of them. Through the morning and afternoon and evening ahead, they will be there, not painful, just present. A low-level physical fact of being female and 43 and correctly dressed in 1883. The front hair is waved and arranged over your forehead, not too girlishly, the wave moderate, nothing that might be mistaken for the more elaborate arrangements of younger women, nothing that says, I am trying to look like something I'm not. A few small pieces are set with the curling iron, which Ellen heats at the small spirit lamp she brings up for the purpose, and the smell of warming hair fills the room, a specific and intimate smell that belongs entirely to dressing rooms and the private machinery of appearance. 2 more pins, a smoothing. Ellen hands you the mirror, the small one, so you can check the back. You check the back. It is perfect. Of course it is perfect. Ellen has been doing this for 6 years, and before that you had Agnes for 9 years, and before Agnes you did it yourself. Less well. Still learning the grammar. The chignon sits exactly where it should sit. Smooth and solid. The pins invisible. The shape classical. The overall impression. A woman of a certain age who takes her appearance seriously. A woman of a certain age. That phrase. You turn it over in your mind the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. You are told the rules in pieces, over time, the way most women of your generation were told them, not as a single announcement, not as one conversation you could point to, but as an accumulation of signals that arrived over the course of your late 30s and early 40s, like letters from a very diligent and unkind correspondent, a comment here, a magazine article there. The particular way a shop girl would shift her assessment of you and produce a different range of goods than she had produced 2 years before. The articles in the Queen and the Ladies' World and Myra's Journal that discussed, with great authority and apparent sympathy, the colours and styles that were flattering to mature women, the careful language of flattering always carrying the implication that other colours, other styles were not. You read the etiquette books. Everybody read the etiquette books. Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, which your mother gave you when you married, has a great deal to say about the proper management of a household and somewhat less to say about what you should be wearing at 40, but it is not alone. The etiquette literature of the 1880s is vast and detailed and comprehensive in a way that makes you sometimes feel less like a person and more like a subject being studied and categorized and organized into its correct drawer. The rules for dress and hair as a mature woman, mature being the word of choice, mature meaning old enough to know better, old enough to stop hoping for certain things, were these. Bright colours are for the young. This is non-negotiable. The bright colours, the reds, the scarlets, the crimsons, the bright blues, the vivid greens, the strong yellows, belong to women in their teens and 20s. These colours announce availability, vitality, the fact of being someone who is still in the active phase of being looked at and evaluated and found desirable. Wearing them past that phase is considered not wrong exactly, not immoral, but something in the vicinity of both, desperate, pathetic, a refusal to accept reality, the specific kind of sad that makes other people uncomfortable. As you age into your 30s, you shift towards secondary colours, deeper blues, burgundy, forest green, teal. These are still colours. They still communicate that you are present in the world, still participating, but they are colours with gravity, colours that understand themselves, colours that are not trying too hard. Past 40, you shift further. You move toward the half colours, the tones, the muted registers. Mauve, lavender, grey, brown, navy, black. Black is always acceptable, which is useful, because black is also the colour of mourning, which Victorian society is perpetually engaged in on some level. Black is efficient, dove grey, slate, the purple greys and blue greys that are close enough to colour to not look completely abandoned, but far enough from it to be respectable. Heliotrope, a sort of dusty purple, is particularly fashionable for women of middle age in the 1880s. It has the advantage of looking like you're in half mourning for something, which is always socially acceptable, while still being technically lavender, which has a certain dignity. Bright colours at 43 are not forbidden by law. There is no social court that will try you for wearing crimson. But there is something worse than law. There is the shared understanding of your social world, the silent agreement of the women around you, the knowing looks and the careful comments and the particular expression on Miss Poole's face in the dressmaker's shop. Not hostile, not unkind, just certain. That communicates the same thing more effectively than any statute could. You will be discussed. You will be seen. Not as someone brave or vibrant or interesting, but as someone who doesn't understand, who hasn't accepted what she is now. Poor Margaret Hartley, someone will say at some tea party you may or may not ever attend, still trying to dress like a young woman, and the room will murmur its agreement. That kind of certainty is harder than law. Law you can argue with. You cannot argue with the murmuring agreement of 23 women at a tea party. Hair is, if anything, stricter than dress. A younger woman has options. She can wear her hair up or any casual domestic settings, in certain intimate social contexts, in the complex visual vocabulary of courtship. She can wear it down or partially down, and it reads as youthfulness, softness, an openness that is socially acceptable because she is still, as the culture understands it, in her available years. A young woman with her hair down is approachable, charming, offering something to the world's gaze. A woman past 40 with her hair down is something else entirely. She is either in a state of undress, which is private and therefore inappropriate in any witnessed context, or she's performing a kind of youthfulness that reads as delusion. At worst, if you apply the Victorian cultural logic rigorously to its conclusion, a woman past 40 with her hair loose is being sexually available in a way that the culture considers embarrassing, not scandalous. Scandalous would at least be interesting, just embarrassing. The embarrassment of someone who has not understood that the door she was walking through has now closed behind her, and she keeps pressing forward anyway, bumping against wood she can't see. These rules were not invented by any single person. They arrived out of a confluence of things, of the Victorian obsession with categorization, with putting every person and thing in its correct place and keeping it there. Of the specific way the Victorians understood women's social value, which was largely tied to their reproductive and matrimonial potential, which diminished in the cultural imagination with age. Of the particular horror the era had of anything that seemed like pretense, like reaching, like wanting more than your station entitled you to want. There was also, and this is worth sitting with, a kind of internal enforcement mechanism that is at least as powerful as the external one. Women who had accepted the rules enforced them on other women. Not always consciously, not always cruelly, But when you've navigated your own transition from colour to grayscale, when you've folded your own bright things away into the press and learned to carry yourself with the particular dignity of the matron, the sight of another woman your age in crimson is not just a social infraction, it's an accusation. It says, there was a choice here, and you chose wrong, and she hasn't chosen wrong. And that is a thing that is very hard to sit with. Miss Poole is showing you the mauve now. She's running her fingers along the edge of the bolt with practiced reverence. She's very good at her work, very good at making you feel that the fabric she is presenting is the best possible choice, the obvious choice, the choice that any woman of taste and sense would make. And you are watching your reflection in the long, brass-framed mirror and thinking, yes, but I wanted the crimson, you take the mauve. You have a moment of mild internal rebellion while Miss Poole is moving to the shelves to look for the appropriate trim, a moment of thinking. She didn't need to move it away so quickly. But it passes. Everything passes. That's something you've learned in 43 years. The small rebellions pass, and then you get on with things. For the bodice, you say, I was thinking perhaps a slightly darker trim. Almost the same shade, but with more violet in it, Miss Poole approves. Excellent choice, she says. Very elegant. Very season-appropriate. Season-appropriate. Another careful phrase. Another word for, this is what a woman your age should be wearing in October 1883. You choose the fabric. You have your measurements taken. Ellen is good, but Miss Poole keeps her own records, and there have been adjustments since last season, minor ones, the kind you notice and no one else does. Your waist, which at 25 was 22 inches and at 35 was 24, is now closer to 27 despite the stays. You do not think about this. You pay the deposit. Miss Poole will send the dress in 3 weeks, and you collect your gloves from the counter and you walk out into Cavendish Square, where the October air is sharp and smells of coal smoke and fallen leaves and horse. The specific London smell that coats the back of your throat like a thin residue of everything the city is made of. The street outside is busy. There is always movement in Cavendish Square in the mornings. Carriages, pedestrians, delivery carts making their rounds. Women doing exactly the kind of errand you have just completed. You stand for a moment on the pavement and look at the square. The plane trees in the centre garden are losing their leaves, that particular bronze that October makes of them, and there is a young woman across the street, maybe 20, in a coat of deep rose pink that is catching the morning light in a way that makes you want to look at it. She is talking to a companion, laughing at something, her face tilted up and lit with animation, and she's wearing that rose-pink coat in the October London morning as if she owns the morning and the street and the square and the light itself. You watch her for longer than is necessary. Then you hail a cab. We need to talk about why these rules existed as specifically as they did, not just in the vague sociological sense, in the direct and uncomfortable and very personal sense of what Victorian society was saying to women like Margaret when it said, tone it down, put it up, step back. The Victorian era was obsessed, in a way that bordered on the clinical, with the idea of each person occupying their correct place. Class determined your place. Gender determined your place. Occupation, religion, marital status. All of these were systems of categorization that told you where you were and what you were allowed to reach for. Age was another one of these systems, but for women, it operated with a particular brutality that it didn't quite manage with men. For men, aging in the Victorian era was, not without its challenges, not without its vanities, but not the cliff edge it was for women. A man aged into authority. Greying hair on a man communicated seniority, wisdom, social weight. A man in his 40s was in his prime. A man of 50 was a man to be reckoned with. There was no point at which a man's social existence was understood to require that he begin the process of fading out, of wrapping himself in half-mourning colours, of pinning down everything about himself that moved or caught the light. Women's social value, as the Victorians understood it, was tied with the directness that they didn't often articulate but completely assumed to the body's capacity for reproduction, and bound up in that its attractiveness to men. A young woman was in her active phase. She was being looked at, evaluated, potentially selected. This gave her, within the very strict limits of Victorian propriety, a kind of visibility and a kind of currency. Her brightness of dress, the softness of her hair arrangements, the colours she wore, all of these were part of a system that announced her presence in the marriage market, her availability, her vitality. Once you were married, and certainly once you were past childbearing in any realistic sense, that currency declined. You'd completed your primary social function. You were now in a different phase, which the Victorians coded as domestic, managerial, maternal, quietly supportive. Relevant but receded, present but not pressing. You were the background of the picture, not the foreground. And the dress codes, the hair rules, these were the visual enforcement of that shift. They were the mechanism by which the culture moved you from the foreground to the background. They weren't just aesthetic preferences. They were a system of signals, a visual grammar that said to everyone who looked at you, she is in a certain phase, she accepts that phase, she is behaving correctly. And the inverse, the older woman in bright colours, with her hair arranged in a way that suggested she was still in the active phase, was a violation of that grammar. It sent the wrong signal. It said, she is not accepted. And that was the thing that could not be tolerated. This was not entirely about cruelty. Parts of it were. The human instinct to establish hierarchy is not always benevolent. But parts of it were also about something more complicated. The Victorians had an intense, sincere belief in the importance of matching your exterior to your interior state, of presenting to the world a face that correctly represented your social position. They called this respectability, and they were not wrong that there is something to it, that there is a kind of honesty in dressing appropriately for your circumstances, in not pretending to be what you're not. The problem was simply that what you were supposed to be at 43 was invisible, and the honesty they wanted from you was the honesty of showing your invisibility, wearing it on your body, letting the world read it in your grey wool and your contained hair. The cab takes you back towards Chiltern Street, but you stop before home. There's a stop you need to make at the haberdasher's on Baker Street. Thread for some mending you've been putting off, and the right colour of ribbon for Clara's Christmas gift, which you are thinking about already because you're always thinking about things like this several months in advance. A habit of maternal forward planning that doesn't stop even when the children have left the house. The haberdasher's is small and warm, smelling of cardboard and paper and the faint sweetness of stored fabric. You know the owner, Mr. Simons, who is 60 and has known you since you moved to Chiltern Street, and who treats you with the easy courtesy of a tradesman who values his regular customers. You browse the ribbon display. There are, in the haberdasher's window, things of great colour, ribbons in every shade, samples of fabric that catch the light from the street window, a display of artificial flowers in brilliant red and cobalt and yellow that the shop uses to attract attention from passers-by. It is perfectly acceptable for these things to be bright. Objects are allowed to be bright. It is people, specifically women of a certain age, who need to manage their brightness more carefully. You're looking at a ribbon of deep crimson satin. Silk satin, good quality, narrow, exactly the right width for the gift you're planning. When Mrs. Eleanor Forsyth comes into the shop behind you. Mrs. Forsyth is 49 and the wife of a barrister. She's also the most reliably well-informed person in a 3-street radius about everything that is occurring, socially, personally, and financially in the lives of anyone within her orbit. She's not malicious, she's genuinely interested in people. The effect is sometimes similar. Margaret. She comes to you with both hands extended, the greeting of a woman who is delighted to see you and wants you to know it, and you accept the squeeze of her gloved hands and return the warmth of it, because Eleanor Forsyth is, in fact, someone you like, and the fact that she occasionally makes you want to press yourself against the nearest wall and become part of it is not her fault. I didn't know you came to Simmons, you say. I'm looking for something for the church bazaar. Trim, or perhaps some silk. She glances at the crimson ribbon in your hand and her eyes move over it with the quick calculation of a woman who has been calibrating the dress codes of her social circle for decades. Oh, that's pretty, she says. For Clara? For Clara, you confirm. Her birthday's in December and she mentioned she needed ribbon. Lovely. Mrs. Forsyth turns to the display of ribbons, begins working through them with the practiced efficiency of a woman who does this often and knows what she's looking for. And then, because she is Eleanor Forsyth, and this is what she does, have you heard about young Mrs. Whitmore, the new wife, Arthur Whitmore's girl married in June? You haven't. Apparently she came to Mrs. Atwill's Thursday last in absolutely, well, I don't want to be unkind, but in absolutely the wrong things. Trying to wear what she wore in the season, which I understand because she's 23 and she's only just married, but Mrs. Atwell said it was rather, she pauses, rather too much. You ask, although you know you're walking into a conversation you partly want to leave. What sort of things? A very bright blue. That electric blue that's fashionable for the younger set. You know the one. Perfectly charming at 23 at a ball, but for Thursday at homes it's... She shrugs, which is its own complete sentence. She's 23, you say. Surely she's allowed to wear blue. Oh, certainly, certainly. It's not about the blue per se. It's about... Mrs. Forsyth's hands move, describing something in the air above the ribbon display. About reading the room, I suppose. Knowing the right level, you can be very colourful when you're young. But as you settle into your place, you learn to moderate. It's just taste, really. Taste. The word does the same work here that it does everywhere. It makes a social enforcement mechanism sound like a natural aesthetic preference. As if women of 43 just naturally, spontaneously, without any particular external pressure, prefer grey wool to crimson silk. As if it's a matter of developed judgment rather than accumulated compliance. Yes, you say. I suppose you're right. You buy the crimson ribbon for Clara. You buy white thread and a card of ivory sewing silk for the mending. You do not buy anything for yourself, which was not the plan anyway. You walk out of Simmons into the October Street. The plane tree at the corner has dropped most of its leaves now, and they make a wet, papery layer on the pavement that your boots press through with a sound like careful small footsteps. The journey home takes 8 minutes on foot. You know the street so thoroughly, have been walking them for 20 years, that your feet make the necessary turns without consulting your conscious mind. and you walk with the internal vacancy that comes from deep familiarity with a route, your body navigating while your mind continues the conversation it was having in Simons's shop. Taste, the right level, moderating. The language is always like this, always constructed to make the restriction sound voluntary, even desirable, the natural conclusion that any reasonable woman would reach on her own if she simply thought it through. And you have in your 43 years spent enough time thinking it through to have an opinion about it. The opinion is this: it is not voluntary. It never was. The rules are what they are, social constraints, dressed up as taste, enforced through the social system, internalized by enough women that they now enforce themselves on each other without requiring any central authority to maintain them. You know this. You have known it on some level for years. And yet here you are, going home to plan the wearing of a new mauve dress in October, with your hair in a chignon with 15 pins. Because knowing the rules are arbitrary doesn't mean you have any practical means of breaking them. The cost of breaking them, not the social cost, though that's real, but the more profound cost, the interior cost, of living in constant daily friction with the judgment of everyone around you, is not a cost most women choose to pay. Most women choose what you have chosen. They learn the grammar. They walk in it so long it becomes their own language. The house on Chiltern Street smells like soap and bread when you come in. Cook is doing something in the kitchen, and the warm smell of it comes up through the house like a benediction. Ellen takes your coat and bonnet. George is in his study. You can hear the scratch of his pen from the hall. He's not a man who needs a great deal of attention in the mornings. This is, by the standards of the marriages you have observed, not a small thing. You go upstairs to the small morning room that is yours alone, a narrow room at the back of the house, overlooking the garden, which contains a writing desk and a chair and a bookshelf, and the particular contained piece of a room that belongs specifically to you and nobody else. You put your purchases on the desk. You sit. You think about the crimson silk for approximately 30 seconds. Then you take out a sheet of notepaper and begin writing your shopping list for the following week. This is the rhythm of it. This is what the days are made of. The afternoon is for calls. Thursday is one of your regular visiting afternoons. The social architecture of Victorian middle-class women's lives is very precisely mapped, with specific days for paying calls and specific days for receiving them. A system that creates the appearance of spontaneous sociability while being entirely organised in advance. You have 3 calls to make this Thursday. Mrs. Armitage on Welbeck Street. Your cousin Dorothea on George Street. And because you promised last month and have been putting it off, Mrs. Lucy Greatorex on Gloucester Place. You eat a light luncheon alone. George has gone out to an appointment, cold chicken and bread and a cup of strong tea. You eat at the dining room table in the full assembled equipment of your day dress, which is one of the small indignities of the corset. You cannot truly relax at meals. You must manage the physical constraint of your stays, while also managing the physical requirement of eating. 2 things that are in mild but constant tension. You eat less than you might at lunch, partly because of this, and partly because you are going to be taking tea at 2 or possibly 3 houses this afternoon, and there is only so much tea and fruitcake a person can absorb in a single afternoon without consequences. You change your dress before the calls. Your calling dress is a deeper blue-grey than the morning wool, the same general category of colour but slightly more formal, with jet buttons down the front bodice and a fine silk trim at the collar and cuffs. It is objectively a handsome dress. Miss Poole made it for you 18 months ago, and it is one of the best things in your wardrobe in terms of construction. The fit is excellent. The colour is correct. Ellen adjusts the back seam slightly. You've put on a fraction of weight since last spring, and the dress pulls minimally across the back of the shoulders. Nothing visible, nothing that anyone else would notice. But you notice it. You notice these things. Your hair doesn't need to be redone. The chignon is still perfect. 15 pins, all holding. It will hold through the calls and through supper, and it will still be holding, just slightly less perfectly when you take it down tonight. The first call, Mrs. Armitage, is the easiest one. She's 61, a widow for 8 years, and has long since completed the transition into the full grey lavender palette of the properly aged Victorian matron. Her drawing room smells of freesia and old upholstery. She serves excellent biscuits and terrible tea, which is an interesting combination. She talks mostly about her daughter's recent confinement, a healthy boy, the first, and about the bazaar at St. George's in 3 weeks, for which she is organising the needlework stall. She asks about Clara's new household. She admires your brooch. It is good call. You leave in 20 minutes, which is the appropriate length for a call that has been social rather than practical. Your cousin Dorothea's house on George Street is a short walk, and you take it rather than calling a cab, because the afternoon has cleared slightly, and the October air is better than the smell inside a cab that has been used by many people in many weathers. The plane trees here are still holding some of their leaves. They turn later on George Street for some reason, something to do with their position relative to the buildings and the wind, and they catch the thin afternoon light in a way that is almost golden. Dorothea is 51. You've been close to her your entire life. She's your mother's niece, 3 years older than you, and was the person you told first when George proposed, and the first person you called for when Clara arrived, and the person who came and sat with you for a week. When you had the miscarriage, the one that happened between Edmund's birth and the end of the children, the one you don't discuss but which exists in the territory between you and Dorothea, like a country you have both visited and neither of you needs to name. Dorothea is wearing brown today, a warm soft brown with cream lace at the collar, and it suits her. She has grey hair now that went grey early, in her 40s, and the brown and grey together make a good palette, warm and grounded. She looks well, actually. She looks like herself. Dorothea always manages to look entirely like herself, even within the constraints, which is something you have observed and tried to understand. You look tired, she says, which is Dorothea's version of how are you actually? I went to Miss Poole this morning, you say. And? Mauve, you say. Dorothea makes a noise that is not quite a word but communicates a great deal. She pours the tea herself. She hasn't got a girl in the afternoons any more since her youngest went to school and the household economised, and hands you a cup that is exactly the right strength, which is one of Dorothea's gifts. She moved the crimson away, you say. Ah. Very gently, very kindly. You pause. I think that's what bothered me most. How kind it was. Dorothea sits back in her chair and looks at you with the expression she uses when she's about to say something true. I wore pink last year, she says. Did you? To Harriet's wedding. A blush pink, not the full bright pink, a very soft one, almost salmon, really. But it had colour in it. And Mrs. Harrington said nothing directly, but she said to Alice, who told me later that I was very brave to wear that. Dorothea pauses. Brave? As if appearing in public in a garment with the detectable hue is an act of courage. There is a pause. You both drink your tea. I'm 43, you say. I know. That's not old. My mother at 43 was... You pause. What was your mother at 43? You were 20 at the time. Your mother was, to your 20-year-old eyes, definitively middle-aged. Your mother's hair was up, her dresses was dark. She had settled comprehensively into the role of respectable matron, and seemed to inhabit it without apparent difficulty. But you were 20. You were not capable of seeing your mother as a person with an interior life that might be more complex than her presentation suggested. I don't know what she was, you admit. I was too young to see it properly. I wonder, Dorothea says, if she felt this. You finish your tea. The call is 40 minutes, which is longer than the one at Mrs. Armitage's, but entirely appropriate for a cousin who is one of your closest friends. You leave promising to come for dinner next week. The call at Mrs. Lucy Greatorex's on Gloucester Place is the most complicated of the three. Lucy Greatorex is 36, which puts her in the transitional zone. She's still wearing colour, still wearing it with confidence, but she is aware, you think, that the horizon is approaching. She's pretty in the full Victorian sense, round-faced and pink-cheeked and dressed today in a deep teal that makes her eyes look extraordinary. Her house is busy with children, 3 of them under 10, who appear briefly in the drawing-room doorway, are shooed out by the nursemaid, and appear again in a different doorway 10 minutes later. The drawing-room smells of children and flowers, and the particular optimistic smell of a house where life is actively happening. Lucy has invited 2 other women for tea, which you didn't know and which changes the nature of the call slightly. One is a Mrs. Partridge, who you've met before, 32, recently moved to the area, with the slightly anxious sociability of someone still establishing herself in a neighbourhood. The other is younger still, introduced as Miss Beatrice Trevelyan, 21, Lucy's niece, visiting from Bath, wearing a dress the colour of new leaves in a spring that has not yet quite committed to being spring, somewhere between yellow and green, bright and clear and obvious, in the way only someone who has no need to be subtle about their brightness yet can be obvious. You sit in Lucy's drawing-room and drink her tea, better than Mrs. Armitage's, worse than Dorothea's, acceptable overall. And you participate in the conversation, which ranges across the comfortable territory of social calls. The upcoming bazaar at St. George's, also being discussed on Welbeck Street. It appears the bazaar is the social event of the immediate future. The question of whether the new music hall on the Marylebone Road is really as scandalous as reported. Mrs. Partridge thinks yes. You think probably not. Lucy is diplomatically non-committal, and the matter of a new hairdresser that has opened nearby who's apparently very talented. Beatrice Trevelyan says very little, but what she says is said with the unconscious confidence of a young woman who does not yet need to calculate the weight of her own presence in a room. She is simply there, in her yellow-green dress, bright without effort, and you watch her without watching her. The way you've been watching women younger than you for several years now, with that peculiar mixture of recognition and distance, as if you are watching someone move through a landscape you once inhabited but no longer have a map for. The conversation turns, as it does, to dress, specifically to the question of what is appropriate for Lucy's husband's firm dinner in November. There are 20 people invited. The dinner is semi-formal. Several of the wives are known for being very well dressed. "What are you planning to wear?" Mrs. Partridge asks Lucy. "I thought the burgundy velvet," Lucy says. "The new one." She turns to you. "You've seen it, haven't you, Margaret? I showed you in September." "It's lovely," you say. The burgundy velvet is in fact excellent. A deep claret red, perfectly cut, the sort of dress that will command attention in a candlelit room. It'll be beautiful at a candlelit dinner. What will you wear? Lucy asks you. The navy silk, you think. The navy with the ivory lace insets, which is correct and appropriate and has a certain dignity that you're aware of and that you wear like a small shield. Probably the navy silk, you say. The one I wore to the Carmichaels in June. Nobody says anything critical about this. Nobody says anything at all exactly, except Lucy says, "Oh yes, that's such a nice dress," with the warmth that means she genuinely thinks so and is not making a point. But there is a fractional moment, you may be imagining it, you are not imagining it, in which the fact that you are wearing navy to a dinner where Lucy is wearing burgundy, and Mrs. Partridge is apparently planning a rich green I've just had made up, and Beatrice Trevelyan will, you can be certain, be wearing whatever she pleases because nobody is going to tell her to moderate. There is a fractional moment in which the shape of things becomes very clear. You are the woman in the navy silk. That is your category now. You're back in Chiltern Street by 6. The house is warm. Cook has had the fires going in the main room since mid-afternoon, and it smells of roasting meat and onions, the specific domestic smell of a house that has a good cook who takes her work seriously. You are tired in the specific way of an afternoon of social calls, which is not physical tiredness exactly. You haven't walked very far, haven't done anything strenuous, but a tiredness of sustained performance, of being correctly present in 4 different social contexts, of monitoring yourself continuously for the small signals and adjustments that are required in each one. George is home and in the sitting room with the evening paper, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead in the way that means he's done reading but hasn't committed to putting the paper down. He looks up when you come in and smiles at you with the comfortable ease of a man greeting his wife of 21 years, a man for whom your presence in the room is a settled and pleasant fact. "Good afternoon," he asks. "Very pleasant, you say." Mrs. Armitage is organising the St. George's Bazaar. Dorothea is well. Lucy Greatorex had some extra people for tea. Anyone interesting? Her niece, from Bath. He nods and goes back to the paper, which is not inattentiveness so much as it is the comfortable silence of 2 people who have been together long enough not to require constant conversation to feel connected. You sit in your chair, the one across from his, the 2 chairs that face each other across the fireplace in the way that chairs in Victorian sitting rooms are arranged, the geography of domesticity, and you take up the needlework that lives in the basket beside your chair, and you work for half an hour in the warm quiet of the room while the fire settles and the evening comes down outside the window. Your needlework is a piece of crewel work, a repeat pattern of roses and leaves on a cream ground. You've been working on it for 3 months. The colours of the thread are, it occurs to you now, all in the lower register of the palette. The roses are dark red, not bright. The leaves are a forest green, not spring. The border is in a warm brown. You have, apparently unconsciously, carried the palette of your own wardrobe into your needlework. You stitch one more leaf and then stop and look at the piece in your lap, the dark roses on the cream ground, and think, I wonder if I could add something brighter. A smaller flower in the border. Something yellow or orange. You probably won't. But you think about it. Supper is the roast you smelled when you came in. A good joint of beef, roasted properly, with potatoes and a green, and the kind of reliable domestic excellence that cook produces with an efficiency that you appreciate and occasionally feel slightly guilty about. Because a woman of your background and education who has a cook is not supposed to feel guilty about having a cook. It's just the way things are arranged. And yet sometimes the knowledge that someone else is doing this fundamental work of feeding your household, this work that is physical and skilled and daily, sits uneasily. George talks about the firm during supper. There is a case he is handling that seems to be going in complicated directions. He is capable, George, of talking about the details of a legal case in a way that you have learned to follow, with enough understanding to ask the right questions and to offer the right observations, which is part of what you do in this marriage. Provide the interlocutor, the sounding board, the thinking companion who helps him work through what he already knows by speaking it aloud. You are good at this. You've been doing it for 21 years. You do not think, "Is this what my mind is for?" You think it occasionally in the small honest moments, but you do not think it at supper. After supper you have the evening. One of the things that separates your life from the lives of women 20 years older, 20 years into greater austerity and constraint, is that you have evenings that are still partially your own. You and George go out sometimes, or have people in for dinner, or spend evenings reading, and this is still just the active phase. You're still present in social life in a way that your mother, by her mid-50s, had begun to recede from. But you are aware of the recession beginning. You feel it in the calls this afternoon, in the way you sat in Lucy Greatorex's drawing room as the most senior woman present, in the way the conversation organised itself slightly around you, with the deference appropriate to a respectable older woman. Not old, not elderly, but older, stable, established, background. You read for an hour after George goes to his study to finish some papers. The book is a novel, one of Mr. Hardy's, the new one, and it is good, properly good, the kind of reading that takes you somewhere else entirely for the duration. You sit in your chair with the fire and the book, and for an hour you're not in Chiltern Street in 1883. You're somewhere else, in someone else's experience, inside the territory of someone else's urgency and feeling. This is another small daily pleasure that is entirely yours, the interior life of reading. Nobody can regulate the colours in there. At 9:30 you go upstairs to dress for bed. Ellen helps with the buttons, the 15 buttons down the back of the calling dress, worked in reverse, each one freed from its loop with the button hook. A process that takes several minutes, but which you have been performing in some version since you were 17, and which your hands manage now almost without thought. The stays are unlaced. The petticoats are lifted over your head and laid across the chair. The bustle is untied and hung on its hook inside the wardrobe. You sit at the dressing table in your chemise and your wrapper, and you take down your hair. This is the moment of the day that you cannot quite explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. The removal of 15 hairpins. Ellen handles most of them, her fingers working quickly through the layers of the chignon, is a physical relief of a particular kind. The pressure releases. Your scalp, which has been carrying the weight and the pins for 14 hours, feels the strange, grateful looseness of something that has been held in place, finally allowed to breathe. It's not pain, exactly. Or it was pain in the early years, before the scalp hardened itself to the experience. But it's something, some sustained low-level tension that you've been carrying through Mrs. Armitage's drawing room and Dorothea's sitting room and Lucy Greatorex's tea party. And it's gone now, and its absence is a relief. Your hair falls. This is the other part of it. The release of the hair itself, the weight of it, the warmth of it, the movement of it across your shoulders, the way it catches the candlelight from the dressing table, brown and silver together, warm and complex, the way it always was and is. Not what it was at 25. The grey wasn't there then. The texture is slightly different. The length slightly shorter, because you had it cut 3 years ago when you had that sustained headache all through the spring and thought the weight of it might be contributing. But still itself. Still beautiful in the private grammar of beauty that exists between you and your own mirror, between you and the candlelight, between you and the fact of what you actually are when no one else's assessment is part of the equation. Ellen brushes it out. 70 strokes, the same as the morning. You close your eyes. This is the only time in the day when your appearance is entirely for yourself. Not for George. He's in his study or in bed, the sleep coming on him quickly and completely. Not for the street, the shops, the drawing rooms. Not for Mrs. Forsyth's quick appraising eyes or Miss Poole's gentle professional redirect. This is for the dressing table mirror and the candlelight and whatever remains of the self that exists underneath the architecture of the day. You look at your reflection in the dressing table glass while Ellen works. The woman looking back at you is not what any etiquette manual would call correct. Her hair is loose and she is in her underclothes, and there are lines around her eyes, and she has a face that is 43 years old in every particular. But there is also, you notice this and it surprises you slightly or perhaps not so slightly, there is also something there that the grey wool and the chignon and the 15 hairpins don't quite manage to contain. Something still in the face that the face contains. You're not sure what to call it. Presence, maybe. The fact of still being here and still being someone and still having, inside the correctly assembled exterior of the respected matron of Chiltern Street, an interior that is louder and more various and more alive than the dove-grey wool would suggest. You cannot say this to anyone. This is not a thing Victorian women of your class are supposed to articulate, even to themselves. But you think it, there in the dressing table mirror, with Ellen's hands moving through your hair, and the candle throwing warm light across the dressing table, and then Ellen finishes and pins the hair loosely for the night. A single long braid, much simpler than the day's architecture, and brings your nightgown, and you rise from the dressing table and complete the remainder of the disassembly, and within 20 minutes you are in bed, in the dark, in the house on Chiltern Street, listening to George's steady breathing and the distant city sounds, and thinking about nothing in particular until the thinking stops. We are only at the beginning of this story. There is a great deal more to see, because in 3 weeks there is the firm dinner that Lucy Greatorex mentioned, and in 3 weeks something is going to happen at that dinner that we need to talk about, something that is going to bring everything we've been discussing, the crimson silk, the chignon, the mauve dress that Miss Poole is sewing in her workroom on Cavendish Square, into sharp, uncomfortable focus. But we'll get to that. For now, sleep. The house is quiet. The fire in the bedroom has banked down to embers, a deep orange glow at the grate. The October wind is working at the window sash, a small regular sound, almost rhythmic, almost like breathing. The city beyond the window is doing what cities do at this hour, continuing underneath the surface quiet with its nighttime version of itself, the categories of person who work or drink or wander, or commit their various acts under the cover of the dark London air. Here on Chiltern Street, the respectable households are asleep. The respectable women of Marylebone are in their beds with their hair braided for the night and their correct dresses hanging in their wardrobes. Tomorrow the chignons will be rebuilt. The pins will be inserted. The grey and mauve and dove-coloured dresses will be put on. The morning will begin. Good night to you, if you're already drifting. Stay if you want to know what happens at the dinner. The 3 weeks pass in the way that weeks pass when you are a woman with a household and a social schedule, and a modest but real degree of organisation required to keep everything functioning correctly. You have supper twice at other people's houses, once a pleasant evening at the Carmichaels', once a less pleasant one at the Fellows', where the fish was not quite right, and someone aired a political opinion that made the table uncomfortable. You go to the bazaar at St. George's, where Mrs. Armitage's needlework stall is excellently organised, and where you buy a small painted screen that you intend as a Christmas gift for Edmund's lodgings, and which is, you later realise, probably not to the taste of a 19-year-old law student, but which seemed right at the moment. You see Dorothea twice. The dinners together are good. Dorothea's cook is better than she gives her credit for, and Dorothea herself is good company, always has been, in the specific way of someone who thinks clearly and isn't afraid of silence and doesn't require everything to be pleasant. You talk about your mother, who's been more forgetful lately, and about whether Dorothea should consider taking a house somewhere warmer for the winter, and about Mr. Hardy's novel, which Dorothea has also been reading, and about whether the new electric lighting they're putting into some of the West End theatres is going to change the way things look, and whether that's good. The new dress from Miss Poole arrives. It is, as promised, beautiful in its way. The mauve, deeply shadowed, the trim darker at the collar and cuffs, the construction excellent, the fit precise. You put it on the afternoon it arrives and stand in front of the full-length mirror in your room and look at it for a long time. It is a good dress. You will wear it. You will wear it to things, and it will be correct and appropriate, and nobody will say, Margaret, that's not quite right. Because it is right, perfectly right, right by every standard the social world you live in has established. It is the right dress for a woman of your age and station in the 1880s. You hang it in the wardrobe next to the navy silk. The firm dinner is on the 12th of November. George's firm, Hartley, Pritchard, and Sums, which it has been since George made partner 9 years ago, holds a formal dinner each November for the partners and their wives, and the most senior managing clerks and their wives, a gathering of about 24 people that is sufficiently important to require careful attention to what you wear, and sufficiently predictable in its social structure that you know exactly what's going to happen and exactly where you'll sit and with whom you'll speak. You have been to this dinner 18 times. You were at the first one, which was in a private room at a restaurant in the city, the year George made partner, and which you attended in a silk dress of deep rose red that you had worn at a ball the previous season, and which was, at 25, entirely appropriate, and which drew a compliment from old Mr. Pritchard about the colour, a compliment that was entirely proper, and that you accepted with the ease of a woman who is used to such compliments. That was 18 years ago. You no longer wear rose red. Mr. Pritchard died 6 years ago. On the morning of the 12th of November, you stand before your open wardrobe for longer than usual. The navy silk hangs on its right side hook. The mauve hangs beside it, its deeper shadows catching the weak November light from the window. There is, at the back of the wardrobe, a dress you haven't worn in 3 years, a deep violet, almost aubergine, that you had made for a family wedding in 1880, and which is, you would say, pushing the boundary. It's in the right tonal range. Purple. No one would argue with purple for a woman of 40. But it's a very saturated purple, a very definite colour, the kind that makes a statement, the kind that says, I am here. You take it out and hold it in the light. The silk is heavy and cold in your hands. Good silk always has that cold quality when you first take it from storage. It warms against the skin, but initially it has the cool precision of something that was made properly and knows it. The colour in the November light is extraordinary, not quite purple, not quite blue, a deep rich shade that has warmth and depth, and a quality of luminosity that the mauve doesn't have, that the navy doesn't have. You put it back, you take it out again, you stand there for a long time. Ellen is waiting with a somewhat patient expression on her face, because Ellen has been your maid for 6 years and has seen you in every variety of indecision, and she knows that the right thing to do is wait. The violet, you say. Ellen takes it from you without comment. She has the professional neutrality to say nothing about the fact that this is not the navy silk, which is what you've worn to the firm dinner for the past 4 years. She simply begins the process of dressing you in it, and in the mirror you watch the colour settle around you as she works. Watch it change the quality of what you look like. Not younger exactly, nothing so simple as that, but more present somehow, more definite, like a woman who is somewhere because she chose to be there, not because she was placed there. The firm dinner is at 7:30. You and George take a cab. November London at 7 in the evening is cold and dark and dense with smoke, and the cab smells of old leather, and the horse's exhalations coming through the small window you've left cracked open because enclosed spaces with coal smoke air are worse than the night air. You sit across from George in the cab. The cab is too small for you to sit side by side in the full skirt, and he looks at you with the mild attention of a man noticing something. "You're wearing the violet," he says. "Yes." "It's very—" He considers. "Good colour on you." "Thank you." He goes back to looking at the street through the window, and you go back to looking at your gloved hands in your lap, and the cab takes you through the November dark. The dinner is at the Solmes house in Fitzroy Square. The Sums have the largest house of the 3-partner households, which is appropriate as Oliver Sums is the senior partner, and it is a good house for entertaining. High ceilings, excellent dining room, a cook whose reputation in the Fitzroy Square area is something of a point of professional pride for the household. You've been here many times. You know the hall, the drawing room where the women gather before dinner, the layout of the dining room, the way the chandelier above the long table throws light differently depending on whether it's been recently cleaned. You go in. Mrs. Sums, Augusta, who is 55 and has been doing this for 30 years and does it with the efficient warmth of a woman who has mastered the art of making large dinners feel like intimate ones, receives you at the door. Her dress is black silk with jet beading, impeccable and appropriate. She takes your hand and says you look well, and you say she does too, and both of these things are true, and none of this is empty. In the drawing room, the women are gathering before dinner. There are 12 of you, 12 wives and the 3 wives of senior managing clerks. And you have been making this gathering for 18 years in various configurations, and you know the patterns of it, the way you know your own kitchen. Who is going to gravitate toward whom? Who is going to require attention? Where the small tensions are? You move through the room with the ease of familiarity, and then you feel it. You feel it in the way a room feels when the temperature changes slightly. Not everyone looks at you. Most people are engaged in their own conversations and don't look at you at all. But there is a moment, it lasts perhaps 2 seconds, in which the room does something, some small imperceptible adjustment in awareness, and you understand that the violet has been registered. Mrs. Hendricks is the first to say something. She's 51, the wife of the younger Sums clerk, a small tidy woman with the kind of precision in everything she does that makes you simultaneously admire and find exhausting. She comes to you with her hands forward and her eyes doing the quick appraising scan that takes in dress colour hair jewellery in approximately half a second. "Margaret," she says, "what a vivid choice. Vivid. Vivid the way brave was Mrs. Harrington's word for Dorothea's blush pink. Vivid the way not suitable was Miss Poole's word for the crimson. The word that is almost a compliment but arrives in the context of that almost smile, that slightly tilted expression, and means, you know what I mean. Thank you, you say. I thought something with some colour seemed right for November. Mrs. Hendricks's smile adjusts by a fraction. Of course, she says, it's a beautiful fabric. And then she goes to speak to someone else. Augusta Sums, passing behind you, puts her hand briefly on your arm and says very quietly, "You look lovely, and it is genuine, and you love her for it. But you're also aware that Augusta is 55 and wearing black, and that Augusta's lovely is the lovely of a woman watching another woman make a choice Augusta herself would not make. A generous and slightly wondering lovely. Dinner is announced. You go in. The dining table is long and candle-lit, and the food is what Augusta's cook does best. A clear soup to start, a fish, then a substantial bird, then the removes and the cheese and the desserts, and the conversation at your end of the table is the expected mixture of firm business, family news, and the topics that are currently circulating in the social sphere of professional Marylebone. You are between Mr. Sanderson, a managing clerk who is quiet and attentive, and Mr. Goodfellow, who is a partner's husband and who is, as always, interested in talking about his investments and the state of the railways. You manage both conversations with the ease of someone who has been doing this for 20 years. But underneath the dinner, underneath the soup and the fish and the railway investments, and the appropriate responses and the managed social surface, you're also monitoring something else. You are monitoring the room, not obsessively, not anxiously exactly. But you are aware of the violet dress in a way that you're not normally aware of the navy silk, because the navy silk does not require monitoring. The navy silk goes unnoticed, which is its point and its virtue. The violet dress is noticed. You can feel it being noticed at the table, not by everyone, not dramatically, not in a way that would make a scene, but in the occasional glance, the particular angle of attention, the way Mrs. Hendricks hasn't quite stopped seeing you all evening. The thing is, the violet is not even the most extreme thing in the room. There is a young woman at the other end of the table, the wife of the newest and youngest clerk, 26, married earlier this year, who is wearing a dress the colour of flame. Not red exactly, but a deep orange red, rich and warm, and she is wearing it with the ease of someone who has not yet learned that she will eventually be required to stop wearing it. She is 26. She will wear red for another decade and a half at least before the system begins to work on her. You look at her across the candlelit table and feel something you can't quite name. Not envy, or not exactly envy. Something more complicated than envy. The dinner ends. The women withdraw while the men drink their port. Augusta's drawing room is warm and the coffee is good and the conversation fragments into smaller groups, and you find yourself with two women you know well. Mrs. Carmichael, 48, in a sensible garnet and black stripe, and Mrs. Fellows, 45, in deep blue. And you talk about Christmas plans and whether the weather will turn properly cold before December, and Edmund's progress at Lincoln's Inn, and it is fine. All of it is fine. You are good company and good at this, and you have done it for 20 years and you can do it for 20 more. It is later, much later, after the men rejoin and the evening continues into the pleasant extended sociability of after dinner, that Mrs. Hendricks makes her move. She comes to stand beside you while you're looking at a painting above the fireplace. A landscape, good quality, hills and water in the pre-Raphaelite manner, very fashionable 10 years ago. She comes to stand beside you with her coffee cup, and she looks at the painting and she says nothing for a moment, and then she says, pleasantly into the painting, "I always think there's such a fine line, don't you, between dressing according to one's taste and dressing according to what's actually becoming." You don't look at her. You look at the hills in the painting. The hills are a warm brown green, painted with care and patience by someone who wanted them to look real. "I do think about it," you say, which is true. "Of course one wants to hold on to oneself," Mrs. Hendricks continues. Her voice is smooth, her tone perfectly pleasant, the tone of a woman having a general observation about an aesthetic principle. "I do understand the impulse, but then as one gets a certain age, and goodness knows we all do, there's something rather—" she pauses, choosing. "Rather undignified about refusing to adapt, don't you think? The painting has hills and a lake and a small figure in the distance on a path. The figure is very small, barely a stroke of paint." "I think," you say, very steadily, still looking at the painting, "that it depends what one means by dignified." A small pause. "Yes," Mrs. Hendricks says. "Of course." She finishes her coffee. "I must go and speak to Augusta." She drifts away with the smoothness of someone who has delivered exactly what she came to deliver, and has no need to wait for a response. You stand in front of the painting for another 30 seconds, the small figure on the path, the hills, the careful, patient light. Then you turn back to the room. Your face is, you are certain, completely composed. This is not difficult. You have been composing your face in moments of difficulty for 23 years of marriage and social life, and the management of everything this life requires managing. Your face is a calm, pleasant, slightly interested face, the face of a woman who is perfectly at ease. Inside the calm face something is very quietly, very precisely furious. Not at Mrs. Hendricks specifically. Although Mrs. Hendricks is not your favourite person, has never been, there is something about her precise tightness that you've always found chafing. But not just at Mrs. Hendricks, at all of it, at the system of which Mrs. Hendricks is only the evening's representative, at the whole elaborate architecture of rules and signals and carefully chosen words, vivid, brave, undignified, becoming, that has been governing the surfaces of your life for the last several years, asking you to make yourself smaller and less visible and less vivid and less present, asking you to attend your own gradual disappearance with cooperativeness and even with grace. You are furious in the specific controlled way of someone who's always had to manage their feelings with precision, who has learned that the fury of women in drawing rooms is not permitted full expression, who knows that the most effective response to Mrs. Hendricks's painting commentary is not to say what you want to say, which would be, "I am 43 years old and I am not dead, and I will wear whatever colour I choose, and your opinion of its becomingness is something I have less and less patience for." But to say nothing, to say it depends what you mean by dignified, and to turn back to the room with a calm face. You are very good at this. You've been very good at this for 20 years. It just costs something. George finds you an hour later, when the evening's winding down and people are collecting their wraps. He takes your arm with the familiar ease of a man who's been with the same woman for a long time and can read the quality of her silence, and he says nothing, just offers his arm, and you take it, and you leave Augusta Sums's warm house and go out into the cold November air, and he hands you into the cab. In the cab, in the dark, going home through Fitzroy Square and along the Marylebone Road, he says, "You all right?" "Perfectly," you say. A pause. "Mrs. Hendricks?" "She's very," you search for the word, "reliable." He's quiet for a moment. "I like the violet. I said that before." "You did. Suits you." You look at him in the dark of the cab, at his profile, the familiar angles of it, slightly softened by the years, the greying temples, the same face it's always been but 20 years further along. This man who has been beside you for 21 years and who, it occurs to you, has never once told you what colours you were allowed to wear. "Thank you," you say. Home. The house quiet. Ellen waiting up. She always waits. It's part of the arrangement you read to help you undress. The familiar reverse sequence. Buttons, petticoats, bustle, stays. The violet dress is hung in the wardrobe. You will wear it again. This decision is made quietly and completely in the time it takes Ellen to hang the dress. You will wear the violet again. But for now, hair. The pins come out. The chignon unwinds. The hair falls. Ellen brushes it out. 70 strokes. And you sit at the dressing table and watch your reflection in the candlelight and think about the small figure on the path in Augusta Sums's painting. You know something about that figure. You know it's still moving along the path, even though it's small, even though from a distance it's barely a stroke of paint. It's still moving. Good night if you're fading. Stay if you want to understand what all of this meant. Because we've been in Margaret's experience for several hours now, and Margaret's experience is the immediate, embodied, intimate version of something much larger, much more carefully constructed, much older than one firm dinner and one drawing room comment. The rules that Mrs. Hendricks deployed like small weapons, vivid, becoming, undignified, didn't appear in 1883. They didn't begin with Margaret. They have a history, and the history matters, not because history makes things inevitable, but because understanding how something was built shows you where the joints are. The Victorian regulation of older women's appearance was part of a broader system for managing women's visibility and power, which is itself a story as old as European social organisation, but it took on its specific Victorian character, its particular intensity, its peculiar precision, its obsession with hair specifically, from a confluence of things that came together in the middle of the 19th century and created something new. The first of these things was the extraordinary expansion of the fashion industry. The 1840s, 1850s, 1860s in Britain saw the rise of the department store, the mass-market fashion plate, the ready-to-wear industry, and most importantly the fashion magazine as a mass circulation publication. By the 1880s, publications like The Queen, The Ladies' World, Myra's Journal of Dress and Fashion, and dozens of others had circulations of tens of thousands, and they all needed content, and a great deal of that content was prescriptive, telling women what was correct, what was fashionable, what was becoming, and for whom. The for whom question is where age enters the picture. Fashion magazines need categories. They need to be able to say, this is for this kind of woman, not for that kind. The categories they used were, inevitably, the categories the culture already had available: class, age, marital status. and age was particularly useful because it provided a natural narrative progression. You could track a reader through her life, telling her what was appropriate at each stage, which kept her engaged, and which also, not incidentally, created the anxiety that drives consumption. If you're not sure whether you're still in the bright colours stage or should be transitioning to secondary tones, you might buy the magazine to find out. If the magazine tells you that women of 40 should be wearing mauve, you might go buy some mauve. The anxiety about correctness was commercially productive. The second thing was the Victorian obsession with respectability. This is so central to the era that it is almost a cliché to mention it, but its specific application to women's dress deserves attention. Respectability, as the Victorians understood it, was about the correct matching of interior virtue to exterior presentation. A woman who dressed beyond her age was not just making an aesthetic error. She was making a moral one. She was claiming something she hadn't earned, displaying what the culture understood as a kind of dishonesty, the dishonesty of pretending to be in a phase you were no longer in. This moral dimension gave the dress rules a weight that pure fashion could never have provided. It wasn't just that you looked wrong in crimson at 43. You were wrong. You were being dishonest about what you were. The third thing, and this is the one that Margaret feels most directly, most physically in the dressing room and the calling room and the firm dinner, is the specific Victorian anxiety about women's sexuality past youth. This is not a comfortable thing to talk about, but it is necessary. Victorian society had a model of women's sexuality that was very narrow, very controlled, and very age-specific. Women were understood to be sexually relevant, in the sense of being potential objects of legitimate male attention, during a relatively brief window of their lives, from approximately 16 to their mid-30s, and only within the correct social framework of courtship and marriage. Outside that window, outside that framework, female sexuality was either irrelevant or threatening. An older woman who dressed in ways that were associated with sexual visibility, bright colours, loose hair, the visual vocabulary that signalled youth and attractiveness, was, in this cultural logic, making a claim that was considered both false and disturbing. She was insisting on a visibility that the system had decided she was no longer entitled to, and the system's enforcers, women like Mrs. Hendricks who had accepted their own invisibility and could not bear to see another woman resist it, policed this with a thoroughness that formal authority rarely matches. The hair rules are the clearest expression of all of this, which is why we need to stay with them a little longer. In Victorian cultural symbolism, a woman's unbound hair is one of the most densely coded visual elements you will find. Loose hair on a young unmarried woman is simultaneously modest, it's just hair after all, and suggestive, because loose hair is what a woman has in the private context of the bedroom, and the sight of it in a more public context implies access to that private context. This is why portraits of young women in the Victorian period often show them with hair slightly loose or partially down. It's a visual language of availability, of openness, of the unlocked door. Married women, at any age, were supposed to have their hair up in public contexts because they were no longer available. The door was closed, the lock was engaged. But a young married woman's hair arrangements could still carry some softness, some romantic suggestion, because she was still in the active phase of being desired by the one man she was entitled to be desired by. For women past 40, the hair rules tightened because the symbolic logic demanded it. You were past the phase of legitimate visible desire. Your hair, therefore, must be contained in a way that communicated the end of that phase as clearly as possible. The elaborately constructed chignon, solid, architectural, pinned so thoroughly it doesn't move, was the visual equivalent of a locked door in a room you're not supposed to be entering anyway. It said, "There is nothing here for you. There is nothing here at all." And the women who most aggressively enforced these rules, the Mrs. Hendricks of the Victorian world, were often, if you look at them clearly, enforcing them on themselves most of all. Because accepting the rules was the only way the system gave you any power within the limitations it imposed. If you became the authoritative arbiter of what was becoming, you retained a form of influence even as your visibility declined. Mrs. Hendricks could not wear crimson, could not wear her hair loose, could not claim the visual territory of younger women. But she could decide who else was allowed to, and police those who reached for things she'd already told herself she didn't want. That's a kind of power. It's a very small and very costly kind, but it exists, and people hold on to it with both hands. November gives way to December. The mauve dress is worn to 3 social occasions, each one correctly appropriate. The violet is worn twice more. Once to a dinner at the Carmichaels, where Augustus Soms is also present, and says again, privately and warmly, that it's a lovely dress. Once to an evening at the theatre, where you and George sit in the stalls and watch a production of something light and musical and very enjoyable, and the violet in the theatre light is extraordinary. Nobody comments on the violet at the Carmichaels. Nobody comments on it at the theatre. Either nobody notices or nobody considers the theatre worth policing. This is useful information. You file it away. Christmas arrives. Edmund comes home from Lincoln's Inn bringing 3 weeks of dirty laundry and a genuine, if occasionally exhausting, enthusiasm for everything he's been reading. You spend a week in a state of sustained domestic organised chaos that you have been doing some version of for 20 years and that you manage, as you manage most things, with efficiency and without apparent difficulty. Clara and her husband come for 3 days, and you watch Clara, who is 22, and who has taken to marriage with the ease of a woman who has found the framework she was looking for, and you feel for her the layered love of a mother who sees her child and the shape of her life ahead and wants both to protect her and to resist the impulse to tell her what's coming. You give Edmund the painted screen. He seems genuinely pleased, which surprises you in a good way. You give Clara the crimson ribbon, which she's delighted by, and which she weaves through the sleeve trim of a new dress she shows you with pride. The dress is a deep rose, beautiful on her, and you watch her in it and think, yes, wear it. Wear it now. Wear it for as long as you're allowed. The thought arrives and you sit with it for a moment, in the sitting room on Christmas evening with the fire and the family and the sounds of the year ending, and you think about what it means that you already know the boundary is coming for Clara, that you are already, from your side of the line, watching her run freely in territory she doesn't know is bounded. And then you think, perhaps it doesn't have to be quite that simple. January, the new year. The days are short and London is at its least pretty, grey and damp, the streets muddy, the light thin and watery from 9 until 3 and then gone again. The kind of month that requires deliberate effort not to simply become a version of the weather. You begin something in January that you haven't done before, or at least not consciously. You begin to pay attention differently. Not to the rules. You know the rules, you know them completely, but to the women around you who are navigating them, and to the small negotiations and strategies and micro-rebellions that you can see, if you look carefully, going on underneath the surface of respectability. Dorothea's blush pink at Harriet's wedding. You think about that. She wore it. Mrs. Harrington called it brave, which was her version of an insult, but Dorothea wore it, and Dorothea is still entirely respectable, still entirely present in her social world, still entirely Dorothea, wearing brown with cream lace and saying true things in a quiet voice. You begin to notice other women. Mrs. Pemberton, no relation, just the same name, who is 60 and who wears, at her age, a deep plum that has more colour in it than almost anything you own. Nobody says anything about Mrs. Pemberton. She's 60 and respectable, and she wears plum, and she's been doing it for years, and at some point the wearing of the plum became simply a fact of Mrs. Pemberton, indistinguishable from her other qualities, and nobody challenges it anymore. You notice the women who have quietly staked out slightly more territory than the rules strictly allow, and who have simply stayed there until the territory became theirs by right of occupation. It requires a certain steadiness, a certain refusal to be moved by the Mrs. Hendricks. You also notice, this is harder to notice, it requires more honesty, the women who have gone in the other direction, who have faded further than the rules required, who are 55 in dove grey, 60 in dove grey, 65 in dove grey, who have been dove grey for so long that they have become difficult to see even in a well-lit room, who sit at dinner parties and move through drawing rooms and make their calls and receive their calls and manage their households with the perfect invisible efficiency of women who have accepted the terms of their disappearance so completely that they've become more pattern than person. This is the thing that frightens you. Not the rules themselves. Rules can be navigated. There are always the small territories of the plum, the violet, the not quite right choices that nobody ultimately prosecutes. What frightens you is the inside of it, the interior version of the disappearance. The woman who has been told to fade so long that she has internalized the fading has started to apply it not just to her wardrobe but to her thoughts, her appetites, her sense of what she's allowed to want or notice or care about. The woman who has forgotten what she wanted to reach for when she put her hand out toward the crimson silk. This is a thought you wouldn't say aloud. This is a thought that would be considered, in the idiom of 1884, rather unwomanly. The suggestion that the problem is not just external, not just about colour and hair, but about something deeper, about the soul's participation in its own containment. You don't have the language for this in 1884 except in your own private grammar, the grammar of the small, honest heart of your mind. But you think it. February. A cold, bright day, the sort that February occasionally produces as a kind of reprieve from its general grimness. You're walking in Regent's Park, one of your regular walks, taken more often in winter than in summer, because summer the park is crowded, and winter the paths are quiet, and the trees are bare, and you can see the structure of things without the leaves getting in the way. You're wearing your warmest coat, a very dark grey wool, long with a collar of dark fur, and your winter hat and your gloves, and you are walking along the inner circle path with a purposefulness that means you're not entirely in the park. You have brought, tucked in your coat pocket, a small notebook. This notebook is one of your private possessions. You've been keeping notes in it, intermittently, for 3 years. Though you wouldn't call it a journal, you'd call it a memoir for things that would otherwise slip away. The notes are not all about the matters we've been discussing. Some are shopping lists, some are records of books read, some are observations about nothing in particular. But since November, since the firm dinner and the painting and Mrs. Hendricks, some of the notes have been about this. You sit on a bench in the cold February park and you open the notebook and you read what you've written. Your own handwriting looks strange to you sometimes. It has changed over the years, grown more decisive, less ornamented. The handwriting of your 20s was rounded and careful, a penmanship that communicated the effort of formation. Your handwriting now is faster, clearer, the pen moving with the confidence of someone who knows what they want to say. November 12th. Mrs. H at the Sam's dinner. Rather undignified, refusing to adapt. Note that the capacity to refuse is itself what's being called undignified. The act of choosing is the problem. November 14th. Wore the violet again to the fellows. Nobody said anything. Interesting. December 3rd. Clara in rose pink. How long has she got wearing it freely? 8 years? 10? Before the Hendricks appear? I should tell her about the Hendricks. I won't. She'll find out herself. But I should. January 8th. Mrs. P in plum. How? By simply continuing. Year after year. The persistence of the choice. February 1st. Question I keep coming back to. Is it cowardice to comply, or is it wisdom? What do you lose by the compliance in the end? You keep the social fabric intact. You keep the friendships, the dinners, the relationships that make the life livable. You avoid the Hendricks. But what do you... The entry ends there. You didn't finish the thought. You sit on the bench in the February park and you look at the bare trees. They look, in winter, like structures revealed. All the architecture you can't see when the leaves are on. The angles and joints and the logic of the branching. You can see, with the leaves off, which branches are dead and which are still carrying sap, still extending, still reaching outward. It requires more attention than summer looking. In summer everything is abundantly obvious. In winter you have to look carefully to see what's still alive. A woman walks past on the path. She's perhaps 60, perhaps a little more, dressed in a dark coat, her hair neatly contained beneath a well-made hat. She walks at a good pace, upright, with the purposeful ease of someone who's been walking regularly all her life and sees no reason to stop. Her coat, you notice as she passes, has at the collar a small bright thing, just a touch, a pin or a brooch, something catching the weak February light with a flash of colour, red or gold, too small to see clearly, gone past before you can identify it. Just that. Just a small bright thing in an otherwise correctly managed ensemble. You watch her walk away along the path. Afterwards, sitting in the February park, with your notebook in your hands and the bare trees across the inner circle and the cold London light coming through them, you think about what it means to choose your battles, not in defeat, not in acceptance of the terms the Mrs. Hendricks set, but in the older, more complicated sense of knowing which ground you're willing to hold and which you'll yield without loss. The violet at the firm dinner, the crimson ribbon for Clara, the small bright thing at the collar, the hair is the hardest. You know this without having fully admitted it before. The hair is where the rules are most absolute, where the symbolism is most dense, where the enforcement is most certain. You have never, in the 7 years since you crossed 40, worn your hair loose in any witnessed context, not partially, not in the softest domestic setting. It goes up every morning and comes down every night, and in between it belongs to the chignon and the hairpins, and whatever it means that. But you sit in the February park and you think, at some point perhaps, the inside of the rules matters more than the outside. At some point, and you don't know when, you can't predict it. Nobody can. The question becomes not whether the chignon is correct, but whether the woman wearing it has kept something underneath it. whether she has retained inside the contained and correct and adequately sombre presentation the self that reached for the crimson silk, whether she knows still what she was reaching for and why. This is what the Victorians never put in the etiquette manuals. This is the question the fashion plates never addressed. You close the notebook, you stand up from the bench, your knees are slightly stiff, it's cold, you've been sitting longer than you meant to, and you shake your coat straight and start back along the path. The trees are bare and the path is quiet and the February light is doing its thin best with the sky. You walk home. March comes in with the particular violence that March reserves for the end of a long winter. Cold still, sometimes bitterly so, but with intervals of sun that arrive like small apologies for the preceding months. The crocuses come up in the Chiltern Street window boxes 3 weeks into the month. You planted them yourself last autumn, pressing the bulbs into the soil of the narrow boxes with the slightly dirty end of a trowel, while Ellen watched from the upstairs window with the expression she uses when she's uncertain whether this falls under her domain of responsibility and decides not to ask. Now they come up, purple and white, and a yellow that is almost aggressive in its brightness, planted without forethought, without any consideration of whether a woman of 43 should be planting aggressive yellow crocuses in her window boxes. They come up yellow, and you are pleased about the yellow. The spring brings the question of the season, not your season any more, not in the sense of the marriage market, which is Clara's domain now and receding, but the social season, the spring and summer circuit of events and dinners and garden parties and exhibitions that gives shape to the year of any respectable London household. You will attend some of these. You will wear appropriate things to them. You have already, with Miss Poole, discussed the question of a new light silk for the summer, something in a mid-tone, blue-grey or soft blue, for the garden parties. What you have also done, quietly, without announcing it even to Dorothea, is begun the small experiment that started in the February park. The small bright thing at the collar, your current brooch, the one you wear habitually with your day dresses, the one George's mother gave you when you married, a modest oval of jet and garnets, appropriate and good, stays where it is. But you have also, in early March, retrieved from the drawer in your jewellery box a pin that you bought from a street vendor at a summer fair in 1878, and have never worn because it seemed too much. It is a spray of enamel flowers, small, delicate, impeccably made, in colours that are, if you're being honest about them, rather vivid. The petals are a clear warm red, the leaves are bright green, the centre a touch of gold. Very small, about the size of a sovereign. Worn at the collar of a dark dress, it is, you have decided, the size of a choice rather than the size of a statement. Large enough that you've made it. Small enough that it invites the question of whether you've made it at all. You wear it first to Dorothea's, which is where you test things, because Dorothea will tell you the truth. Dorothea looks at it for a moment when you come through her door. She takes your coat, sees it, says nothing. You sit down. Tea is brought. The conversation moves where it usually moves. Your mother has been more herself this week, which is a relief. Dorothea is considering a week in the south of France in April. The question being whether to go alone or wait and see if you want to come. Then Dorothea says, quite mildly, looking at the brooch, "Is that new?" "Not new. I've had it for years. I haven't seen it before. I haven't worn it before." A pause. Dorothea takes a biscuit from the plate. She is thinking. You can see her thinking. Her face does something specific when she thinks, a slight inward turn of attention. "It's nice," she says. "Very pretty, the enamel. Yes, I like it with a dark grey. You look down at the brooch against the grey wool of your bodice, the red petals, the bright green leaves. You've liked it all morning too. Mrs. Hendricks would call it vivid, you say. Mrs. Hendricks, Dorothea says, is very interested in what other women do. This is for Dorothea a fairly strong statement. The thing is, you say, I'm not sure I can explain what it means to me wearing something like this. It seems completely excessive. It's a brooch. It's a decorative pin. It's not about the brooch, Dorothea says. No, you agree. It's not about the brooch. Dorothea is quiet for a moment. Outside her window, the March wind is doing something unkind to the street. A gust of it drives a handful of old leaves against the glass and then releases them. I've been thinking about the hair, she says. You look at her. Not publicly, she adds quickly. I'm not going to let my hair down to call on Mrs. Armitage. I'm not proposing anything insane. She pauses. But I've been thinking about it. The way the rules about hair are so specific, so total. The dress rules have some give in them. There's a range of acceptable. There's negotiation at the margins. The hair has no give at all. None, you agree. It made me wonder, Dorothea says, and she says it the way she says things she has been thinking for a while and hasn't said yet. The particular care of words that have been considered. Whether that's because the hair is where they most want the control. Because if you let a woman have some flexibility about hair, you've given up the clearest visual signal, the most readable signal. If older women start wearing their hair in ways that communicate that they still have an interior life that isn't contained, she stops, smooths her skirt with both hands. I sound like a radical, she says. You sound like someone who's been thinking carefully, you say. Same thing, possibly. You both sit with this for a moment. The gust dies away and the street is quiet again. I'm not going to change anything dramatic, you say finally. I'm going to wear the brooch. I'm going to wear the violet when it seems right. But I'm going to keep paying attention, you pause. That's the thing, actually. Paying attention. I spent the first 40 years paying attention to everything, and I think sometime around 40 I was supposed to stop. To become someone things happen around rather than someone to whom things are happening. Yes, Dorothea says. That's exactly it. Neither of you says anything else for a moment. Outside, the wind picks up again. Somewhere on Dorothea Street, a horse is being difficult. You can hear it. The particular sound of hooves not doing what they're being asked to do. Come to France, Dorothea says. You go. 2 weeks in Menton, which is on the Mediterranean coast, which in April is warm in a way that London manages approximately 4 days a year, where the light is Mediterranean light, different in quality from anything you get in England, richer and more certain, a light that seems to commit to things rather than merely suggesting them. You've not been abroad since before Edmund was born. The last time you were out of England was the summer of 1862, when you and George went to Paris for a fortnight before the children made travel complicated, and you were 22, and everything was different. Dorothea has been to France more recently, and manages the arrangements with the ease of someone who knows that luggage can be sent ahead, and that French porters respond well to a confident approach, and that the pension on the Rue de la Paix in Menton has good beds and a proprietress who speaks sufficient English to manage the south of France in April. The almond trees are already in blossom, and the mimosa is still going. You didn't know about the mimosa in Menton, didn't know that a whole city can smell of mimosa for weeks. A sweet, dusty smell that gets into everything, including your hair and your dreams. The sea is blue. Not the grey-green of the Channel, not the sea you know from the English coast, but a specific Mediterranean blue that you have never seen before and which seems, the first morning you stand and look at it from the pension garden, almost invented. Too perfect to be entirely natural. You wear in Menton colours you wouldn't wear in London, not dramatically. Not the crimson of the Cavendish Square dressmakers, but you and Dorothea between you have brought things that have slightly more range than your usual London wardrobes, and in the April light of the midi coast, things that would look excessive in a Marylebone drawing room look not only acceptable, but entirely right. You wear a deep blue one afternoon, a strong pure blue nearer to cobalt than navy, and Dorothea wears a coral-tinged brown that is more coral than brown, and you walk along the promenade in the warm coastal sun, and you feel, both of you, like women who have taken a holiday not just from London, but from the London version of yourselves. There are other English women in Menton in April. It is a fashionable resort, particularly for those with health concerns, because the climate is dry and warm and has historically been recommended for the chest, and you meet some of them at the pension and at the little English church on Sunday mornings and in the gardens where people gather in the evenings. Some of these women are older than you, some are your age. They are on the whole dressed as English women of a certain respectability dress, which is recognisable even in southern France. The appropriate tones, the contained hair, the careful management of visibility, but there is something slightly different about all of them here, away from the specific gravity of London social life. Something slightly loosened, not transgressed, not abandoned, but loosened. As if the rules are still present but held more lightly, the way you hold a heavy thing differently when you can put it down for a moment rather than carrying it all day. You observe this. You find it interesting. You have dinner one evening with a woman named Mrs. Caroline Finch, who is 67 and lives in Menton permanently. She tells you she came for her health in 1876 and simply stayed, because the English winters had become intolerable, and her children were grown, and there was nothing in Kent she strictly required. She is a small woman with completely white hair that she wears in an arrangement that is technically a chignon, but a very large and somewhat unstructured one. Not the tight architectural version of London, but something looser, warmer, the hair clearly doing what it wants to do within the broad containment of a few pins. She wears, that evening, a dress of deep rose, not a girl's rose, not the rose of the young woman in the orange-red dress at the firm dinner, but a warm rose, a colour that has been through some experience, and it looks entirely right on her. She is, you realise, over the dinner and then over the bottle of local wine that follows it, extraordinarily good company. She's been in France for 8 years. She knows everyone in Menton and several people in Nice and Monaco. She has opinions about the new hotel that's been built on the coast road, and about the best route to walk up into the hills behind the town, and about whether the French approach to garlic is an improvement on the English approach to almost everything else they cook, which she believes it is. She is sharp and funny and completely at ease with herself, and at no point during the evening does she seem to be managing herself in any way. She is not performing acceptable, age-appropriate older womanhood. She is just there, in her rose dress, talking about whatever she's interested in. "Do you miss England?" you ask her. She considers this seriously. "I miss my children," she says, "and I miss the particular quality of light on a good English September day. That's about all." "You don't miss the social life?" Mrs. Finch laughs. It's a very good laugh, unguarded. "This social life," she says, The specific pleasure of being managed by other women's opinions of whether I'm wearing the correct colour. She shakes her head. No, I don't miss that at all. Do you know what it was that finally... Well, there was a morning. I was 59. I was getting dressed for a friend's at home. A very respectable at home. Nothing at all out of the ordinary. I had a new dress, a very good new dress in a blue, that I thought was beautiful, and that my dressmaker had thought was beautiful, and that frankly was beautiful. Objectively, simply a beautiful colour. And I stood in front of my mirror and I looked at it and I thought, I am going to wear this dress and someone will say something, and I am going to hear what they say and understand it perfectly, and it will make absolutely no difference to me whatsoever. She drinks some wine. And then I went, and someone did say something, and it made absolutely no difference to me whatsoever. And that was it, you ask? That was it, she says. Once you've had the thought, it's very difficult to unhave it. You and Dorothea walk back to the pension after dinner through the Menton evening. Warm, the mimosa still going in someone's garden. The stars over the Mediterranean, the same stars as over London, but seeming somehow more certain of themselves here. Dorothea has your arm. You walk slowly. I want to remember this, you say. Which part? Dorothea asks. All of it, you say. Mrs. Finch in her rose dress. The way she laughed. She has found something, Dorothea says. I'm not sure what to call it. Permission, you say. I think she's found that she's allowed to give herself permission. A pause. The warm evening. The smell of the sea. Are we? Dorothea asks. You don't answer immediately. You walk a few more steps. The pension light is visible ahead, a warm yellow square in the dark. I think, you say carefully, that the question of whether we're allowed is less important than the question of whether we're going to. Ah, Dorothea squeezes your arm. She doesn't say anything, but she holds on. You come home to London in late April. The city receives you with its usual indifference, its particular grey-brown April morning light, its smell of coal and mud, and the particular sour-sweet smell of the Thames at low tide if the wind is coming from the southeast. The house on Chiltern Street is exactly as you left it, exactly as it has always been. George reading his paper, the cook in the kitchen, the morning routine intact. You unpack your trunk in the bedroom and you hold for a moment in both hands the deep blue dress, the cobaltish blue, that you wore on the Menton promenade. Then you hang it, not at the back of the wardrobe where the violet was, but in the front. Ellen, organising the returned laundry, notices this, says nothing, but notices. May. The London season begins in earnest. The parks fill up with the particular social density of late spring, the green chairs full, the paths busy, the carriages in the row performing their stately parade. You're not hosting a season. You don't have a daughter to bring out, Clara having managed hers and married from it. But you are part of the social fabric of it in the way that any established household of your standing is always part of the social fabric. You go to things, you appear, you wear appropriate things and make appropriate conversation and occupy your appropriate place in the hierarchy of the drawing room and the dinner table. But something is slightly different, not dramatically, nothing that Mrs. Hendricks would be able to point to with the same precision she deployed in November. Something internal. You have started asking different questions, not rebellious questions, not the questions of someone staging a protest, just different. When you stand before your wardrobe in the morning, you no longer ask only, what is correct for this occasion? You add, what do I want? And then you negotiate between the two. not always landing somewhere different from where you would have landed before, but sometimes landing somewhere the negotiation wouldn't have produced in 1882, before Menton, before February, before the violet dress and the painting and Mrs. Finch's laugh in the warm evening. The enamel flower brooch has become a regular thing. You wear it several times a week. Nobody has mentioned it with the weight Mrs. Hendricks brought to bear on the violet. It has simply become part of your appearance. Noted, perhaps, but not prosecuted, because persisted in choices eventually exhaust the energy of those who would challenge them, and because the brooch is, after all, only a brooch. The cobaltish blue dress is worn to a Royal Academy opening in May, the private view, which you attend with George and the Carmichaels, and which is the kind of event where a certain latitude of dress is available, where the crowd is sufficiently various, and the occasion sufficiently artistic to allow for a range of presentation that more purely social events don't permit. Nobody says anything about the dress. George looks at you when you come downstairs in it and says, "Good," which is his most efficient form of approval. At the private view you see a great many paintings. Some of them are very good. Some of them are paintings of women, Victorian paintings of women, which are their own particular subject, their own complex territory. There are paintings of young women with loose hair and soft clothing, and the romantic pastoral arrangements that Victorian painting loves, reclining in gardens, picking flowers, dreaming by windows, half-turning with the particular half-turning that positions them for the observer's eye. There are paintings of older women in darker settings, darker clothing, more formal arrangements, domestic scenes, conversation pieces, women managing households and children and the practical business of life. The young women in the paintings are looked at. The older women are looking at things or managing things or being present in the background. You stand in front of one of the paintings for a long time. It's a painting of a woman who is perhaps 50, a well-made woman, well-dressed, in a dark interior, standing by a window with light coming in from outside. Her hair is up. Her dress is a dark silk, beautifully rendered. She's holding something in her hands, a letter perhaps, or a piece of cloth, too small to see clearly. She's not looking at the painter. She's looking at the thing in her hands or at something beyond the frame of the painting entirely. Her face is remarkable. Not beautiful in the conventional sense, not young, but absolutely inhabited. A face so clearly in the possession of a complete interior life that looking at it, even in paint, feels like an intrusion. The painting is titled Interior with Figure, not Portrait of a Woman, not even a name. Interior with Figure. You stand in front of it for longer than is polite for a single painting at a crowded viewing. Margaret, George at your elbow. The Carmichaels are moving on. "One more minute," you say. He waits. Who painted you, you think, at the woman in the painting? Who saw you clearly enough to put this on the canvas? Because this is not a painting of a woman fading out. This is a painting of a woman who is entirely, quietly, powerfully present, who happens to be in a dark room in a dark dress, and who is looking at something we can't see, and who is, in that private attention, more vivid than anything else in the room. Interior with Figure. Who gave her that title? Who decided that the figure should come second? You move on. The Carmichaels are waiting. June. Clara comes to London for 3 weeks without her husband, who is occupied with his business affairs, and you have her in the house in a way that is different from Christmas. Lighter, less formal. The two of you together in the mornings while George is out, and the household breathes around you. Clara is, you observe with the close attention that mothers apply to their children no matter how old the children get, very well. Marriage has settled something in her that was unsettled before. Not that she was unhappy before, but she was searching in a way that she is not searching now. The anxious searching of a young woman who hasn't yet found the framework she needs. She has the framework now, and she inhabits it with the ease of something naturally suited to its container. You think, watching her drink her morning tea across from you in the small sitting room, she's going to be very good at the life she's chosen. She is going to manage it with efficiency and warmth and intelligence, and she is going to be appropriate in all the right ways, and she is going to reach the various thresholds, 30, 40, the arrival of Mrs. Hendricks, the moment with the dressmaker, without anyone having told her they were coming. You should tell her. You have this thought on a Tuesday morning in June, and then you put it aside, and then it comes back the following Thursday and you put it aside again, and on a Saturday morning when it is raining, and you're both indoors, and the sitting room is pleasant with the rain against the windows, and Clara is sewing something and you are pretending to read, you say, "Can I tell you something?" Clara puts down her sewing. She has always been good at paying full attention when asked for it. Of course. You consider how to start. You want to start correctly, not as a warning, not as an instruction, not with the didactic earnestness that mothers and daughters have been negotiating since the beginning, just as a truth you want to pass on before the opportunity closes. When I was 25, you say, I had a dress the colour of garnets, a deep red, almost crimson. I wore it to every occasion that was important enough to warrant it for 3 years, and then the fashion shifted and I put it away, and then we moved, and I think Cook used it for something. I'm not sure what, but it disappeared. Clara's listening. I loved that dress, you say. I don't mean that I was vain about it. I mean that it was mine. The colour was mine. I chose it. You pause. In the last few years I've been going to a very good dressmaker on Cavendish Square. She makes things beautifully, and she is very careful and correct about what she shows me, and there is almost nothing she shows me that is red. Clara's face does something, a small comprehension moving through it. I want to tell you, you say, that the moment when it becomes the correct thing for you to stop choosing the red, whenever it comes, whatever form it comes in, it's not actually a law. It feels like one. It has the weight of one, but it's not. You pause. You don't have to make the choice they're suggesting. You can make a different one. There are costs to that. But there are also costs to the other choice, and nobody ever lists those. A silence. The rain against the window. Clara's sewing sitting in her lap like a small patient animal. What happened to the crimson? She asks. Miss Poole moved it away from my hand in the dressmaker's shop, you say. In October, very gently, I bought mauve. And then I went home and thought about it for 3 months, and then I wore the violet dress to the firm dinner, and Mrs. Hendricks told me I was refusing to adapt. What did you say? I said it depended what you meant by dignified. Clara smiles, a real smile, full and unguarded. Good, she says. And then I went to the south of France with Dorothea, and met a woman of 67 in a rose dress, who has given herself permission to wear it, and doesn't particularly care what anyone says about it. And now? You think about this. And now I wear the enamel flower brooch, and the violet when it seems right, and I'm negotiating the rest. Clara is quiet for a moment. She picks up her sewing and sets it down again. I'll remember this, she says, when the moment comes. I'm not sure when it will come, you say. It comes gradually. You don't always see it happening, but you'll feel it. the first time someone moves something away from your hand. The red silk, Clara says. Something like it. Another silence. The rain. Clara reaches across and puts a hand briefly on yours, a gesture without particular name, a gesture that simply means, I hear you, I'm here. And then she picks up her sewing. The summer passes. It is a good summer, not the best summer London produces. There are rainy weeks in July that make the garden parties difficult, but good on balance. The kind of summer that builds itself out of small reliables, warm evenings, the parks at their peak green, the season's social calendar providing its rhythm of events and obligations that are, taken individually, sometimes enjoyable and sometimes tedious, but which together constitute the texture of the life you've built. George is busy with the firm and occasionally preoccupied in the way of a man whose work is taxing, but never unreachable. Edmund comes home in August and is, to your genuine surprise and relief, showing signs of actually becoming interested in law. He has taken on a small research project at Lincoln's Inn that he describes at some length over dinner with the slightly too loud enthusiasm of someone who has just discovered they're capable of caring about something. You wear the cobalt blue twice more. At a garden party in Kensington, where you meet a woman of 47 who is wearing a dress of almost the same colour, and who looks at yours and then at you, with a companionable look of two people who have made the same choice and recognised it in each other across a social gathering. You exchange some words about the weather and the state of the garden, and whether the strawberries are this year better or worse than last, and both of you know that the actual conversation has been different from and simultaneous with the apparent one. You wear the brooch almost daily now. You've added to it, not extravagantly, just a second pin, a small enamel spray of forget-me-nots in a clear soft blue that you found in a jeweller's window on Wigmore Street when you weren't looking for anything and which was too right to leave. Two small bright things at the collar of dark dresses, the brooch and the forget-me-not pin, the accumulated small choices, what you haven't done, what you're still not going to do, what you're clear-eyed about not yet being ready to do, is the hair. The hair is still up. 15 pins every morning, the chignon every day. The architecture of containment that comes down every night and goes up every morning, that has been coming down and going up every day for 20 years. That has become so habitual and so complete that you sometimes catch yourself, in the brief half-minute between waking and rising, reaching for it before you've fully opened your eyes, because you're not Mrs. Finch in Menton. You're not there yet, in that place she's found, that 67 years in the south of France place where the accumulated weight of other people's opinions has simply become too light to carry. You have 43 years of living inside this system, 43 years of its grammar being the grammar you think in, and the brooch and the violet and the cobalt blue have been steps, but they are not that step. But you've stopped pretending the step isn't there. This, you've realised, is not a small thing. There is a woman you see occasionally in the neighbourhood, and we need to talk about her because she is the thing that clarifies what you're actually afraid of. The specific version of the future that sits at the end of the path of complete compliance. Her name is Mrs. Dorothea Weston, no relation to your Dorothea, and she is 64 and has lived on Devonshire Street for 30 years, and is, by every external measure, entirely respectable. She's always correctly dressed. Her hair is always impeccably contained. She attends the same church as Mrs. Armitage and the same seasonal events as the women of her circle, and she receives calls on Wednesdays and pays them on Fridays, and she is, when you think about it clearly, almost entirely absent. Not absent from her life. She's there. She's in it. She moves through it with the smooth efficiency of long practice, but absent in the sense that's hard to name without sounding unkind, in the sense that when she speaks, you often realize after she's been talking for 30 seconds that you've been listening to the shape of conversation rather than to content, in the sense that her opinions, when they arrive, are always exactly what the occasion requires them to be, in the sense that looking at her across a drawing room, you sometimes try to find the person in there, the specific woman, the one with preferences and appetites and the private grammar of her own experience, and you can't quite locate her. She's been compliant for so long. She's been appropriately coloured and appropriately coiffed and appropriately present in the background for so many years that the self that made those choices has become difficult to separate from the choices themselves. She is indistinguishable now from what she was told to be. Whether she was this before the telling, whether she would have arrived here anyway, is unknowable. But you look at her and you feel, with a clarity that is not comfortable, the thing you are most afraid of. Not of becoming old, not of the grey hair or the lines around the eyes or the various physical facts of time. These are real, but they are not frightening. What frightens you is the interior grey, the dove grey of a mind that has applied the same logic to itself that the culture applied to the dress. Tone it down, contain it, step back. A mind so long accustomed to occupying only the sanctioned range that it has forgotten there was once a wider range available. You think about this in September, when the season is over and the social pace slows to something more manageable, and you have more evenings in the house with the fire and the book and the quality of quiet that allows real thinking. You think about it when you watch Mrs. Weston at the Autumn Bazaar moving with perfect smoothness through the needlework stall, committing no errors and offering no surprises, and you think, you still have the notebook, you still have the small, honest part of your mind that speaks in the dressing table mirror and in the February Park and in the pension garden in Menton looking at the Mediterranean. You still have the conversations with Dorothea and the memory of Mrs. Finch and the small figure on the path in the painting over the fireplace. You still have the crimson ribbon you chose for Clara and the flower brooch and the day you said, "It depends what you mean by dignified." The question is whether that's enough to keep it going. The interior life, the paying attention, whether the compliance with the external rules, which you have not broken in any fundamental way, which you will probably continue not to break in any fundamental way, because you are 43 and not 67 and not in Menton, and not yet fully free of the weight of the grammar you've been speaking since you were 17. Whether that compliance will eventually do what it did to Mrs. Weston, whether maintaining the form will eventually empty the content, you don't know. You can't know in advance. This is one of the things the etiquette manuals never addressed, the thing Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management never answered. How do you keep the inside lit when you're steadily reducing the outside's brightness? You do not have a definitive answer. You have the notebook. You have Dorothea. You have the small conversation with Clara and the memory of Mrs. Finch's rose dress in the evening. You have the brooch and the forget-me-not pin. You have the violet dress hanging in the front of the wardrobe. These are not nothing. They're not everything. They are what you have. October arrives again. The year has come around. The plane trees on Chiltern Street are losing their leaves again. That same bronze, that same wet, papery sound underfoot that you walked through last October on your way to Dorothea's. The window boxes have long since finished with the crocuses and are holding their empty soil for spring. The air has the bite in it that October always has, the first certain cold that says, winter is coming, arrange yourself accordingly. You go, on a Tuesday morning in the second week of October, to Miss Poole's shop on Cavendish Square. You have a commission in mind, a winter dress, something for the darker months, something for the dinner parties and the theatre and the occasional evening event that will fill the season ahead. Miss Poole receives you with the warm professionalism of a woman who values her regular customers. Tea is brought. You sit in the good chair by the window. The shop smells as it always does, wool and dye and camphor and the faint sweetness of good silk. Miss Poole has new stock. She shows you several things. A beautiful slate blue wool that she recommends for a morning dress, a soft grey mauve that would make an excellent walking dress for the coming months, a rich charcoal silk that she says would be quite outstanding for evening wear. You look at all of these. You will probably buy the charcoal silk, which really is outstanding. And then, because Miss Poole has turned to the shelves to show you some trim, your eyes move across the shop and settle, in the far corner of the display, on a bolt of fabric in a colour that takes your breath, briefly and completely, the way it always does, the way some colours just do, regardless of what you've been told about their appropriate audience. It is a deep, deep rose, not the girlish pink of young women's dresses, a rose that has gone far enough into the red spectrum to have weight and authority, closer to raspberry really, the colour of something ripe, complex, warm, not restrained. Miss Poole turns back from the shelves. You reach out your hand. You hold your hand where it is, extended, touching the edge of the bolt, the cold weight of good silk against your fingertips. Miss Poole looks at the fabric. She looks at you. You watch her face. The quick professional assessment, the slight consideration, the moment of decision. She doesn't move it away. It's just arrived, she says. From Leon, extraordinary quality. She unrolls a length of it across the counter and it falls in a wave of that deep warm colour that catches the October light from the window and holds it. Very rich. It would want the right occasion. Yes, you say. She drapes a length of it along her forearm and holds it near your face. You watch yourself in the brass-framed mirror. The colour and your face and the grey threads in your hair and the lines around your eyes and the face that is 43 years old in every particular, and the rose silk and the October light. It does something, Miss Poole says, looking at the mirror with you. Yes, you say. It does. A pause. It's perhaps not for every occasion, Miss Poole says carefully. She's still learning something. You can see her learning it. But for the right evening, the right room, the right woman, you say? Miss Poole looks at you. A long moment. Something passes between you in the language of women in dressing rooms, women in mirrors, women who have been in these negotiations for years and who sometimes, across the counter, recognize each other. The right woman, she agrees. You buy the charcoal silk for the evening dress. You buy a length of the deep rose for a shawl, a large shawl, the kind that serves as a wrap, that can be draped over an evening dress and that occupies a slightly different category from a dress itself, that has a touch more latitude, that nobody specifically regulates in quite the same way. A shawl is not a dress. A shawl is not a statement. A shawl is a practical item that a woman might throw over her shoulders at the end of the evening when the room has grown cool. A shawl in deep rose silk is also, and this is the grammar you've been learning all year, the grammar of the negotiated choice, the brooch and the forget-me-not pin, and the violet and the cobalt blue, a specific answer to a specific question that was asked in this same shop, at this same counter, 1 year ago, when something was moved away from your reaching hand. The shawl is made in 3 weeks. It arrives wrapped in tissue paper, folded with care, and when you lift it from the wrapping, the colour is everything it was in the shop. That deep, warm rose, complex and certain, the colour of something that knows what it is. You wear it for the first time in November at a dinner at the Carmichaels. The charcoal silk evening dress beneath it is perfect and appropriate in every way. The shawl across your shoulders it is the right word, you have to admit it is the right word. Vivid. It is vivid. It catches the candlelight the way that specific shade of deep rose into crimson always catches the light. And Augusta Summies, who is seated across the table, looks at it and then at you and says, "What a beautiful shawl, Margaret." "It's from Lion," you say. "The colour is extraordinary." "Yes," you say. "I thought so." Mrs. Hendricks is not at the Carmichaels this evening. You eat your dinner. You talk about the law case George has been navigating. You talk about Edmund's progress and the question of whether the new railway extension will change anything about the Marylebone neighbourhoods. You drink the excellent wine the Carmichaels serve. You are, through all of this, a woman in a charcoal silk dress with a deep rose shawl across her shoulders, in a candlelit room full of people who know you well, and nobody says a word about it that isn't warm. On the way home, in the cab, George looks at the shawl and says nothing. Then he says, "That's not the usual thing." "No," you agree, "it's nice." "Thank you." The cab takes you through November London. The streets are dark and the coal smoke is particularly heavy tonight, and somewhere above the smoke the stars are there, and you're going home to Chiltern Street with a charcoal silk dress and a deep rose shawl, and the small notebook in your bag and the memory of the whole year accumulating behind you like something you've built without having drawn up plans. The house. The warmth of it. Ellen waiting. The familiar reverse sequence of the day's assembly. Ellen's hands at the buttons, the stays loosening, the petticoats, the bustle on its hook. You sit at the dressing table. Ellen begins the pins. 1, 2, 3. Each one released, set on the china pin dish with the small click it always makes. 4, 5. The architecture of the chignon coming apart in stages, the careful work of morning running in reverse through the evening, the solid structure giving back what it borrowed. 6, 7, 8. The chignon begins to yield. The hair takes its weight back. 9, 10, 11. You feel the specific relief of it, the releasing of pressure along the scalp, the unfastening of the held, the return of weight and movement to the hair that have been still all day. Your shoulders drop very slightly, as they do every evening when the stays have gone, when the body's allowed to remember what it feels like when it isn't arranged. 12, 13. Ellen is humming very quietly under her breath. She does this sometimes in the evenings, not quite audibly, a private and probably unconscious thing. She's been doing it for 6 years and you have never mentioned it. 14, 15, the hair falls, and this is the thing that you cannot explain to Miss Poole and that you wouldn't say to Mrs. Hendricks, and that you wrote only the beginning of in the notebook in the February park. This is the thing that is entirely yours and always will be. The hair falling. The particular moment of private return, of the day's assembled self coming apart back into the self that existed before the assembly. The weight and warmth and length of it, the brown and silver of it in the candlelight. The way it sits across your shoulders and down your back with the ease of something that has been doing this all along, waiting patiently inside the chignon for the evening. You look at yourself in the dressing table mirror. Your hair is down. You are 43 years old. Your hair is down and it is yours, entirely yours, in this room, in this light, and it is. You look at it. You look at your face and your hair and the lines around your eyes and the grey at the temples. It is genuinely, simply, without any need for qualification, beautiful. Not young, not performing anything, not trying. Just the actual thing. The accumulated actual thing of a woman who has been alive for 43 years and whose hair is the colour of something that has been through experience and come out the other side with more in it than it started with. Ellen picks up the brush. 70 strokes. You close your eyes. The brushing. The sound of it. The feeling of it. The reliable physical kindness of it at the end of the long day. Behind your closed eyes, the year. The October dressmaker's shop and the crimson silk moved aside. The 15 pins and the morning assembly. The firm dinner and Mrs. Hendricks and the painting with the small figure. Menton and Mrs. Finch's laugh. Clara across the sitting room on a rainy June morning. The notebook in the February park. The deep rose shawl in the candlelight. The small bright things, the accumulated small choices, the negotiated territory, not Mrs. Finch's territory, not yet. Not the full freedom of 67 in the south of France with the white hair doing what it wants to do. But not Mrs. Weston's territory either. Not the interior grey. Not the woman indistinguishable from her compliance. Something in between. Something still finding its edges. Ellen finishes the brushing. She braids the hair loosely for the night, the simple braid of bedtime, and pins it once with a single pin, and brings the nightgown and the disassembly completes itself. And then you are in bed, in the dark, listening to the London night through the window sash, the distant traffic, the occasional voice, the long low undertone of a city that doesn't entirely sleep. And George is asleep beside you with his steady, uncomplicated breathing, and the house is quiet around you, and the day is done. Tomorrow the assembly begins again. The stays, the petticoats, the chignons, the 15 pins, the correct dress for whatever the morning requires, but also, hung in the wardrobe, the deep rose shawl, the violet dress, the cobalt blue, the enamel flower brooch on its velvet cushion, and in the notebook on the desk, the things you've been paying attention to, the things you're still paying attention to, the figure on the path still moving, even if it looks like only a stroke of paint from a distance. These yours. The sounds of the city drift further away, or maybe you're simply listening less. The boundary between the waking world and the sleeping one begins to soften in the way it does when you're genuinely tired, not the anxious tiredness of too much thinking, but the simpler tiredness of a body that has been in motion since 6:30 and knows it has done what it was asked to do. You think in the last conscious minutes about the crocuses that will come up again in the window boxes in February or March, the purple and white and the yellow that is almost aggressive, that you planted without thinking about whether a woman of 43 should plant aggressive yellow. They will come up yellow again. You know this with the certainty of someone who's been paying attention. You think about what you said to Clara. It depends what you mean by dignified. You've been thinking about this all year. You think the answer is something like, dignity, properly understood, is not the same as invisibility. Dignity is the condition of being entirely what you are, without apology, without performance, without the managed retreat that other people's discomfort recommends. The woman in the painting, interior with figure, the woman looking at something beyond the frame with her full interior life visible even in oil on canvas, she had dignity. not because she was wearing the correct thing or had her hair arranged in the correct way, because she was entirely quietly, undeniably there. You are there, in this bed, in this house, on this November night, in this life. You are there. Not the correctly assembled Margaret Hartley of Chiltern Street only, not only the version that sits correctly in drawing rooms and wears appropriate colours and keeps her hair maintained. The whole thing. The woman who reached for the crimson silk and the woman who bought the mauve and the woman who chose the violet and said what she said about dignity. The woman who has a notebook and a cousin she can tell the truth to, and a daughter she finally told something real. The woman who sat in a Menton garden listening to a 67-year-old laugh without restraint at the very idea that she should moderate herself. The woman who will put on 15 hairpins tomorrow morning and wear them all day and take them out again tomorrow night and feel the relief of it and close her eyes for the brushing. The woman who is not finished, who is not background, who is not ready to fade. Let the city run through its night around you. Let the watchman call the hours from somewhere distant. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, the small counted hours of the London dark, the same hours that have been called on these same streets for 200 years. The same system of marking time that ran through the nights your grandmothers slept and will run through the nights of women not yet born. The plane trees on the street below have lost their leaves and will grow them again in spring. The crocuses are waiting in their cold soil. The deep rose shawl hangs in the wardrobe and will be worn again. You are warm enough, settled enough, present enough. You have a life that is yours and a mind that is working and a hair that is down in the dark of the bedroom and will be up again in the morning. And both of these things are true simultaneously, and neither cancels the other. This is enough. This is, in fact, quite a lot. Let sleep come now. Let it come the way October comes after September. Inevitable, right? The thing that was always going to happen next. Let your thoughts slow from the things they've been doing all day, all evening, all year. The monitoring and the navigating and the negotiating, the paying of attention to the 10,000 things a woman of your time and place and circumstance is required to pay attention to. Let all of that slow, let it soften, let it become less distinct at the edges, the way things become less distinct when you're drifting away from them. The city is still out there. The women of Marylebone are in their beds with their hair braided for the night and their morning chignons ahead of them. Somewhere Mrs. Hendricks is sleeping with the serenity of someone who has said the correct thing in the correct moment. Somewhere Mrs. Weston is sleeping in her complete compliance. Somewhere, in a pension in the south of France, Mrs. Caroline Finch might be sitting up late and writing letters and wearing her white hair as she pleases. And here, Margaret Evelyn Hartley, née Pemberton, 43 years old, in a house on Chiltern Street, London, 1884, still here, still paying attention. Everything else can wait until morning. Sleep now. Centuries from now, the women who will live on this street, if this street still exists, if the city hasn't been reshaped beyond recognition by time and fire and flood and the patient work of people who didn't yet exist, those women will have different sets of rules, different boundaries, different versions of the things that are not done and the things that are done but not quite right, and the things that someone at a dinner party will call vivid or brave or undignified or not suitable in the specific language of their own time's enforcement of its own limits. Because the system changes, but the impulse to tell women which portions of themselves are acceptable and which should be managed, which colours, which behaviours, which forms of visibility, that impulse is older than the Victorian era and will probably outlast it by a significant margin. But so will the other impulse, so will the reaching hand, so will the small notebook, so will the conversation in the rainy sitting room between the mother and the daughter, the one that says, "You don't have to make the choice they're suggesting. There are costs to that. There are also costs to the other choice, and nobody ever lists those." So will the woman, whatever age she is, whatever century, who stands in front of a dressing table mirror with her hair down in the candlelight and looks at herself and thinks, "This is genuinely beautiful and it is mine and I am not required to pretend otherwise." Some things don't change. The human impulse toward brightness, the human refusal, however quiet and however partial and however costly, to disappear. Let that be the last thought. Let it carry you through the boundary, the hair in the braid on the pillow, the rose shawl in the wardrobe, the notebook on the desk with its unfinished sentences and its small, careful truths, the 15 hairpins in the china dish waiting for tomorrow. All of it waiting, none of it gone. Good night.